Hi guys, and welcome to Bedtime History Relaxing. Tonight we slip quietly into London, the year 1665, and you are standing in the street as the city holds its breath. The air feels close, even before you know why. It smells of damp wood smoke, refuse and human closeness. You probably will not survive this, at least not comfortably, and that uncomfortable truth hangs in the background like a low cloud that never quite clears. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you are listening from somewhere far away, leave a comment with your location and the local time. Now dim the lights and stay where you are. You stand in London at a moment when nothing dramatic has happened yet, which somehow makes it worse. The streets look familiar. Timber houses lean toward each other like old gossips. Shops are open. People move past you with baskets, tools and purposeful expressions. But something has shifted beneath the ordinary rhythm. Conversations trail off. Voices lower when certain words threaten to surface. You notice how often people pause as if listening for something they hope not to hear. London in 1665 is already a difficult place, even before disease enters the picture. More than 400,000 people are packed inside its boundaries, making it one of the largest cities in Europe at the time. This is a well-known historical reality, not a romantic exaggeration. Space is a luxury. You live close enough to your neighbours to hear their breathing at night and their arguments during the day. Privacy is a modern fantasy that has not yet been invented. You walk slowly, feeling the ground under your boots. The streets are uneven, sometimes paved, sometimes muddy, sometimes both at once. Waste flows along shallow channels at the edges. The sound of carts rattling over stones blends with footsteps and shouted prices. You can smell bread baking somewhere nearby, mixed with less comforting scents that cling stubbornly to the air. London does not hide its bodily functions. It shares them with you whether you want that intimacy or not. What unsettles you is not illness itself, at least not yet. It is anticipation. News travels slowly here, mostly by mouth, sometimes by hand, written notice, often distorted by fear or wishful thinking. You have heard that something is wrong in the parishes outside the city walls. A few deaths. Nothing official, nothing confirmed. Still people are watching each other more closely. A cough draws attention. A flushed face lingers in memory longer than it should. One mainstream historical fact sits quietly beneath your feet. The plague never truly left England after earlier outbreaks. It returned in waves, smaller and larger, haunting communities for generations. This year simply feels different, though no one can yet explain why. You sense that difference in the way shopkeepers hesitate before accepting coins, rubbing them between their fingers as if cleanliness might be judged by touch alone. There is a strange, almost absurd comfort ritual spreading through the city. You notice little bundles of herbs tucked into pockets or hung near doorways. Lavender, rosemary and rue are popular choices. A quirky detail from the time is that many people believed strong smells could block disease from entering the body. You might catch yourself breathing deeply from one of these bundles, not because you truly believe it works, but because it feels like doing something, and doing something is easier than waiting. Londoners are not ignorant. They observe. They remember. They compare notes. Historians still argue whether people in 1665 had a practical understanding of contagion that went beyond superstition. Some evidence suggests they noticed patterns such as sickness following contact or clustering in certain areas. Others argue that without germ theory, fear simply filled the gaps where explanation failed. Standing here, you feel both impulses at once. The city's leadership tries to project calm. Orders are discussed, not yet enforced. The machinery of governance turns slowly weighed down by tradition and hesitation. You hear rumours that the king may leave if things worsen, though no one says that out loud just yet. Even imagining it feels disloyal. You keep that thought tucked away like a dangerous spark. At night, when you return to where you are staying, sleep comes unevenly. You lie listening to the sounds of the building settling. Wood creaks. Somewhere nearby, someone snores. Outside a dog barks, then stops. You think about how close everyone sleeps to everyone else, separated by walls thin enough to feel more symbolic than real. If something moves through the city, how could it possibly stop at a doorframe? Morning brings routine again. You wake with the light filtering through small, imperfect windows. Work waits. Errands wait. Hunger certainly waits. Life insists on continuing even when anxiety hums beneath it. You step outside and notice that people greet each other with a fraction more distance than before. Not enough to name it, but enough to feel it. You pass a church and hear murmured prayers drifting through an open door. Faith is not optional here. It is part of the architecture of life, as solid as the stone beneath your feet. Some people pray for protection, others pray for clarity. A few pray simply because silence feels unbearable. As you move through the day, you realise that London is not panicking. Not yet. It is bracing, holding its breath, waiting for confirmation that fear is justified. That waiting may be the hardest part because imagination rushes in to fill the quiet spaces. You do not know it yet, but this moment of uneasy normality will soon feel precious. You'll remember these streets still busy, still noisy, still alive, and you will wish for their careless energy later. For now, though, you keep walking, breathing in the city as it breathes around you, both of you unaware of how much is about to change. You wake into the same narrow room, but today you notice the walls more. They lean inward slightly as if listening. London homes are built for efficiency, not comfort. Timber frames filled with plaster and wattle press close together, sharing warmth, smells, and sometimes secrets. When you step outside, you feel how little space truly belongs to any one person here. The street is not just a passageway. It is an extension of every home that opens onto it. You walk carefully, because walking carefully is a habit you develop quickly. The ground changes texture every few steps. Stone gives way to packed dirt. A shallow channel carries yesterday's waste towards somewhere you prefer not to imagine. You lift your hem without thinking, a small daily gesture that marks you as someone who lives here and knows better. London's population density is not just a statistic, it is a sensation. People brush past you constantly. Sleeves graze sleeves. Baskets bump hips. Someone's breath warms your cheek for a second longer than comfort allows. This closeness is not considered rude. It is simply how life works. You learn to share air the way you share sound. Most people live in 1 or 2 rooms, sometimes with entire families compressed into that space. Apprentices sleep where they work. Servants sleep where they are needed. A single bed may host multiple bodies arranged with the practical intimacy of people who cannot afford distance. This is a widely accepted reality of 17th century urban life, recorded in household accounts and court records that leave little doubt about how tightly packed the city truly is. You hear arguments through walls that seem almost decorative. You hear laughter too, and crying, and the steady cough of someone you have never met, but feel you know intimately. Sound travels freely here, unconcerned with privacy. You become used to learning the rhythms of your neighbours' lives without ever speaking to them directly. The street vendors are out early. A woman sells apples from a basket balanced against her hip. A man hawks hot pies with a voice trained to carry above the noise. You notice how food is everywhere and yet never quite enough. Hunger shapes schedules, tempers and priorities. People eat when they can, not when they wish. One small and oddly charming detail of daily life is how people mark their territory in subtle ways. A stool placed just outside a doorway. A broom leaned at a certain angle. These gestures say this space is claimed even if only temporarily. You find yourself respecting these signs instinctively, stepping around them as if they were invisible fences. Inside the houses, the air is heavy. Fires burn low, not for comfort, but for cooking. Smoke lingers because chimneys are imperfect and windows are small. You can taste the air, sometimes a mix of soot and grease and human presence. Clothes absorb these smells and carry them back out into the street, blending everyone into a shared atmosphere. Those who have shops on the ground floor live above them, meaning work never truly ends. You hear looms, thumping hammers, striking, and voices bargaining from early morning until light fades. At night, the quiet is relative. There's always someone awake somewhere close enough to remind you that solitude is rare. Historians still debate how much this constant closeness contributed to the spread of disease compared to other factors like sanitation and nutrition. Some argue that crowding alone cannot explain the patterns observed. Others believe the sheer density of human contact created conditions where illness had every advantage. As you stand here surrounded on all sides, the argument feels less abstract. Children dart between adults, learning early how to navigate tight spaces without apology. They play games that require little room, clapping, chanting, hopping in place. Their laughter rises sharply and falls away just as quickly. You wonder how much they notice the tension creeping into adult conversations, or if they simply accept it as another background noise. You pass a communal well and see people waiting their turn, buckets at their feet. Water is a shared responsibility, so is patience. A disagreement flares briefly over who arrived first, then settles into muttered resentment. No one wants trouble. Trouble draws attention, and attention feels risky lately. You realise that in a city like this, illness is never just personal. If one person falls sick, it touches everyone nearby. There's no clean separation between households. The idea of isolating completely feels impossible, almost absurd when your elbow touches 3 strangers before noon. As evening approaches, you retreat indoors again. The room feels smaller now that you have noticed how the city presses inward. You sit listening, breathing, adjusting. London does not give you space to reflect quietly. It teaches you to reflect amid noise, movement, and other people's lives unfolding inches away. You lie down, eventually sharing the bed or floor as needed, and let the sounds carry you towards sleep. Footsteps outside, a distant argument, someone laughing too loudly as if trying to convince themselves. The city wraps around you tightly, a crowded embrace that offers warmth and danger in equal measure, and you drift knowing that whatever comes next will come to all of you together. The rumours reach you before anything official does. They arrive folded into ordinary conversations, slip between comments about weather and prices. Someone mentions a death in a nearby parish, then quickly adds that it was probably something else. Another lowers their voice to say they heard of 2 houses marked already, though no one can say where. You learn quickly that certainty is rare and confidence is often borrowed. You notice how people test information here, weighing it not against evidence, but against hope. If a story sounds frightening, it is dismissed as exaggeration. If it sounds reassuring, it spreads with impressive speed. You find yourself doing the same, leaning toward whatever version allows you to keep moving through your day without your chest tightening too much. A well-established historical detail sits quietly behind these whispers. In late 1664 and early 1665, isolated plague cases appeared in parishes just outside the city walls. These early deaths were recorded but not widely publicised. Officials hesitated to sound alarms too soon, fearing panic and economic disruption. You can feel that hesitation now in the gaps between what is known and what is said aloud. At street corners, small groups form and dissolve. You pause near one without meaning to listen, but listening is unavoidable. A man insists the illness came from imported cloth. Another swears it arrived with sailors. A woman crosses herself and mutters that it is punishment, though, for what she does not specify. No one laughs at her. Even those who disagree keep their objections gentle. You pass a tavern and hear the same debates echoing inside, carried on fumes of ale and bravado. The mood is restless rather than drunk. People drink not to celebrate, but to steady themselves. Someone pounds the table to emphasize a point, then apologizes immediately, as if noise itself might tempt disaster. One oddly specific habit begins to stand out. You see people sniffing the air with suspicion, as if sickness might announce itself by scent alone. A quirky belief circulating at the time held that plague could be detected by a sweet or rotten smell before symptoms appeared. You catch yourself doing it too, inhaling cautiously, even though the city always smells strange. Habit quickly becomes instinct. Printed pamphlets appear sporadically, sold by hawkers, who shout headlines that change from street to street. Some promise cures, others warn of danger. Many contradict each other entirely. You realise that information here is a marketplace subject to exaggeration, competition, and personal bias. Truth struggles to make itself heard above the noise. Inside, Holmes' families discuss what they would do if the rumours proved true. Who would leave? Who would stay? Where they might go? These conversations often end unfinished, trailing off when the implications become too heavy. Leaving requires money, connections, and somewhere safe to land. Most people have, at most, one of those things, if any. Historians still argue whether the slow and uneven spread of information delayed effective responses or prevented unnecessary chaos early on. Some suggest that early panic could have caused more harm than the disease itself. Others believe that hesitation cost lives. Standing here caught between whispers and silence, you feel how both arguments might be true at the same time. You begin to notice small behavioural shifts that no one names outright. People linger less in conversation. Greetings shorten. Physical closeness becomes slightly more deliberate. A handshake pauses for half a second before happening anyway, as if social expectation outweighs personal caution. That pause tells you everything. The church bells ring as usual, but now you listen differently. Each toll invites interpretation. Is it for a death? a service, a routine marking of time. You cannot tell, and that uncertainty follows you down the street. You realise how much comfort comes from knowing what sounds mean, and how unsettling it is when meanings blur. At night, rumours grow bolder. Darkness seems to give them permission. Someone claims whole households are already sick. Someone else insists the city is hiding numbers. You lie awake, replaying these fragments, trying to assemble a coherent picture from pieces that do not quite fit. Sleep arrives reluctantly, shallow and easily disturbed. Morning light brings a fragile reset. Shops open, work resumes. You almost convince yourself that yesterday's talk was overblown. Then you see a red mark on a door frame a few streets away, hastily painted and not officially sanctioned. It is probably meaningless, probably. Still, you detour around it without consciously deciding to. You realise that rumours are not just information here, they are a coping mechanism. They allow fear to circulate rather than stagnate. Speaking it aloud, even inaccurately, feels better than holding it alone. You participate despite yourself, repeating something you heard with a disclaimer you do not fully believe. As the day wears on, official silence begins to feel louder than any rumour. You sense the city leaning forward, waiting for confirmation or denial that will finally allow fear to take a more definite shape. Until then, uncertainty fills every available space. You end the day with a strange mix of relief and dread. Nothing has happened to you personally, yet. The rumours have not solidified into undeniable reality, yet. You lie down knowing that once fear has entered a city, this crowded, it does not leave easily. It settles into walls, conversations and sleep, and it waits patiently for its moment to be proven right. By the time the numbers arrive, they feel both expected and unreal. You first see them posted near a parish church, a single sheet nailed where notices usually hang. People slow as they pass, pretending not to look, while doing exactly that. The paper flutters slightly in the breeze, as ordinary as any announcement, yet it carries a weight that presses into your chest. These are the bills of mortality, a weekly accounting of deaths compiled from parish records. Surviving civic documents make it clear that London had relied on these lists for decades, originally to track trends rather than provoke fear. This week, though, the cause column matters more than the total. You trace the lines with your eyes and feel your breath catch when you see the word plague appear small and neat but unmistakable. Names are absent, only numbers remain. It is a subtle cruelty, though likely an unintentional one. Numbers feel safer to handle, easier to scan quickly, but they also strip away individuality. You wonder who those people were, what streets they walked, whether you passed them recently without knowing. The thought follows you as you move on. Crowds gather and disperse around the postings throughout the day. Some people count carefully, lips moving. Others glance once and hurry away. You notice how reactions vary wildly. One man shrugs and says it is nothing new. A woman covers her mouth and pulls her shawl tighter. Someone laughs too loudly and makes a joke about exaggerated clerks. Humour flickers briefly, then fades. The lists are read aloud in taverns. Later, their figures debated over mugs of ale. Someone claims the numbers are being manipulated to keep trade flowing. Another insists they are inflated to justify stricter control. Later scholars would question how accurate these tallies truly were, noting inconsistencies between parishes and the pressures placed on those recording causes of death. Standing here, you sense how fragile trust becomes when fear sharpens attention. An unexpected habit emerges around the bills. You see people checking them repeatedly, even though they change only once a week. It is not about new information, it's about reassurance through familiarity. Reading the same lines again somehow feels like staying informed, even when nothing has changed. You find yourself doing it too drawn back by a need you cannot quite explain. At home, the numbers follow you. Conversations circle back to them again and again. Someone tries to calculate risk aloud, dividing deaths by population, by parish, by proximity. The math never brings comfort. It only reshapes anxiety into different forms. You notice how easily numbers can dominate thought when they represent something so intimate. One peculiar reaction spreads quietly through certain neighbourhoods. Some people begin to mark their doors voluntarily with symbols meant to ward off illness. Chalk marks, scraps of paper with prayers, bits of metal nailed above thresholds. This practice is not ordered by authorities. It grows from a desire to be seen as protected, or perhaps simply as prepared. You hesitate, then add something small yourself, more for peace of mind than conviction. As the days pass, the bills grow longer. The plague column thickens. Shops adjust their hours. Markets thin out at certain times of day. The city does not stop, but it stutters. Each week brings anticipation mixed with dread as posting day approaches. You learn to recognise it by the tension in the air, the way people gather earlier and linger longer. Some argue that the lists create unnecessary panic. Others insist they provide clarity in a sea of rumour. Writers of the time recorded both reactions, leaving behind pamphlets that scolded readers for obsessing over the numbers while simultaneously urging vigilance. The contradiction feels familiar even centuries later. You begin to notice something subtle but profound. The bills change how people see one another. Each stranger becomes a potential entry in next week's list. Each cough becomes a possible statistic. Empathy and suspicion exist side by side, uneasily balanced. You help a neighbour carry water one moment, then avoid another's gaze the next. At night, you replay the figures in your head despite yourself. You imagine them climbing steadily, then flattening, then climbing again. You imagine where the line might stop. Sleep becomes fragmented, interrupted by half-formed calculations and images of lists that never end. Yet life insists on continuing alongside the numbers. Children still play. Bakers still rise before dawn. Carts still roll through streets that have seen worse things than paper notices. You hold on to these routines as anchors, reminders that the city is more than its statistics. When the next bill appears, you approach it more slowly. You already know what it will say in general terms. More deaths. More plague. The specifics almost matter less than the confirmation that the trend continues. You read it anyway because not reading feels like surrender. As you turn away, you realise that the bills have changed you. They have trained your attention, reshaped your fears, given your anxiety a schedule. Once a week, the city looks itself in the mirror and counts what it has lost. You are part of that ritual now, unable to look away, carrying the weight of those numbers as you walk back into streets that feel just a little narrower than before. The change arrives quietly, not with an announcement, but with a knock that does not quite sound like a knock. It is firm, official, and final. When a house is suspected, the door becomes a boundary rather than an entrance. You see it happen on a nearby street first. A family you recognise not well but well enough, is told they must stay inside. Their windows remain open, but their lives narrow instantly. This is quarantine, as London practices it in 1665. Once sickness is reported, a house can be shut up for 40 days. Records from city ordinances confirm the procedure. A red cross is painted on the door, accompanied by words asking for mercy. Guards are posted to ensure no one leaves. The intent is protection of the many, but the experience for the few feels like confinement. You stand across the street and watch as neighbours adjust their paths, giving the house a wide berth. No one says anything cruel. No one needs to. Avoidance speaks clearly enough. You feel the strange pull of sympathy and relief at the same time. It is not your door. Today. Inside, life compresses. Families remain together, whether they wish to or not. Air grows stale. Time stretches unevenly. Those inside must rely on deliveries left at the threshold. Food arrives if someone can afford it, or if charity intervenes. Not everyone is so fortunate. Surviving diaries describe the sound of voices calling out through windows, asking passers-by for help. An odd detail emerges from these accounts. Some households pass notes tied to strings lowered from upper windows requesting specific items or simply contact. The strings sway slightly in the air, fragile lifelines that feel almost symbolic. You imagine how it must feel to watch the street from above, close enough to touch, yet unreachable. The guards posted outside have an unenviable role. They are paid little and exposed constantly. They stand for hours enforcing rules that benefit the city but isolate individuals. Some perform their duty strictly, others bend the rules quietly, allowing brief exchanges or messages. There are stories of both cruelty and kindness, and the truth likely contains more of the latter than official records admit. Later analysis has raised questions about how effective this house-based quarantine truly was. Some researchers point out that confining the sick with the healthy likely increased transmission within families. Others argue that without it, the spread through the city might have been faster still. From where you stand, theory feels distant. The human cost is immediate and visible. You notice how quickly fear reshapes relationships. A friend hesitates to visit. A relative sends word instead. Even care becomes cautious. People leave food and retreat before the door opens. Voices are raised to avoid proximity. Compassion adapts to survive. At night, the sealed houses feel louder. Sound escapes even when people cannot. You hear crying, coughing, murmured prayers drifting through windows. The city seems to listen collectively, holding its breath along with those inside. Sleep comes reluctantly when you imagine being on the other side of that door. Some people attempt to flee before quarantine can trap them. They move preemptively, leaving behind furniture, pets, and sometimes debts. Others stay deliberately unwilling to abandon loved ones or property. Contemporary letters suggest that these decisions were agonizing and deeply personal, not taken lightly despite later judgments. You pass another shut house the following day. The red marking is fresh, the paint still uneven. A small crowd stands nearby, not too close, whispering. Someone mentions that the family was healthy yesterday. Someone else insists the signs were obvious. Everyone agrees it could have been any house. A peculiar superstition spreads alongside official measures. Some believe that voluntarily staying indoors before any order arrives can ward off attention, almost as if remaining invisible might offer protection. You find yourself lingering inside longer than necessary, inventing reasons to delay errands. Yet the city continues to function around these pockets of stillness. bakers deliver, watchmen patrol, bells toll at measured intervals. The contrast is unsettling. Life moves freely around houses that have become islands of enforced stillness. You realise that quarantine changes the meaning of home. It is no longer only shelter. It becomes border barrier and sometimes sentence. The same walls that once promised safety now represent risk. You glance at your own door more often, imagining what it would look like, marked and guarded. As days pass, you learn to read the street differently. A new guard means a new case. A window left dark all day invites speculation. The city becomes a map of fear and adaptation, red marks scattered among ordinary doors. When you lie down that night, you listen for footsteps outside, half expecting them to stop at your door. They pass. Relief washes through you, followed by guilt for feeling it. You tell yourself you will help if you can when you can. Tomorrow. For now you remain free, aware of how fragile that freedom is, knowing that a single knock could redraw the boundaries of your life overnight. Night sounds different now. You notice it the first evening you stay awake long enough to hear the city settle. London never truly falls silent, but the pattern has shifted. The usual late laughter thins out earlier. Doors close with more intention. Windows are shut, despite the heat that lingers even after sunset. When darkness fully arrives, the city seems to listen to itself. Then you hear it. A bell. Slow. Measured. Not the jubilant ringing of celebration or the orderly call to prayer. This sound moves deliberately step by step through the streets. It is followed by a voice roughened by repetition and night air announcing the presence of the dead. The night criers have begun their rounds. Contemporary city regulations describe their role clearly. These men are tasked with collecting the bodies of those who die from the plague, usually under cover of darkness. They call out to alert households to bring out their dead. It is meant to be practical, efficient, and discreet. In practice, it becomes one of the most haunting features of the outbreak. You sit still as the sound approaches, unsure whether you are supposed to respond or simply endure. Somewhere nearby, a door opens. You hear muffled movement, then the dull sound of something being placed onto a cart. There is no ceremony beyond necessity. The voice calls again, moving on. An unsettling detail emerges. Once you grow accustomed to listening, the criers do not always sound the same. Some are brisk, businesslike. Others carry a weary solemnity that settles into your chest. A few, according to period anecdotes, were known to drink heavily to manage the work. You imagine how difficult it must be to walk this route night after night, becoming the sound that signals loss. The carts themselves are rarely seen clearly. Lantern light reveals only outlines, wood, wheels, a shape beneath a covering. You do not look too closely, partly out of respect, and partly out of self-preservation. What you cannot see fully feels easier to carry into sleep later. Debate among later historians centres on how these nighttime collections affected the spread of fear compared to their practical benefits. Some suggest that removing bodies quickly reduced exposure. Others note that the psychological impact may have intensified dread, embedding the presence of death into the rhythm of nightly life. Listening from your bed, the distinction feels academic. The sound alone is enough. Sleep becomes an uneven thing. You drift off only to wake when the bell returns on another street. Each time you check your surroundings automatically. Are your doors closed? Are your windows shut? Is everyone breathing normally? You hate how quickly your mind runs through these checks, how natural it feels now. During the day, people speak of the night criers cautiously. Some complain that the calls are too loud, too frightening. Others argue that knowing is better than guessing. A few claim the sound itself spreads illness by stirring the air, a belief that gains traction despite its improbability. Fear is not particularly concerned with logic. Children ask questions that adults struggle to answer. Why only at night? Where do the carts go? Will the bell come for us? Answers vary depending on the speaker's patience and exhaustion. Sometimes reassurance is offered, sometimes distraction, sometimes honesty slips through in tired moments. You notice how the nighttime work creates invisible boundaries. Streets that hear the bell feel different the next morning. People glance at one another with shared understanding or shared suspicion. The sound lingers even after it has passed, echoing in memory more than in air. One oddly human habit develops among some households. They play music softly at night or keep quiet, conversation going longer than usual, not to drown out the bell, but to remind themselves they are still alive. You find comfort in small sounds, a spoon against a bowl, a whispered joke, the shift of someone settling into sleep nearby. The men who perform this work become figures of unease. People avoid them by day, even though they are essential. You see one in daylight, once leaning against a wall, rubbing his eyes. He looks ordinary, tired. You realise how easy it is to fear a role rather than a person. As nights pass, you begin to anticipate the sound. That anticipation is perhaps the most unsettling part. The bell no longer startles as sharply, which feels like a loss of something important. You wonder what else you might grow accustomed to if this continues. Lying awake, you count the seconds between the bell's rings, measuring distance and direction. You imagine the cart's route as a slow-moving line across the city, connecting houses that have nothing else in common. This shared experience, unwanted and unchosen, binds neighbourhoods together in quiet awareness. Eventually, exhaustion claims you. Sleep arrives not because you feel safe, but because your body insists. Even then, the sound follows you into dreams, transformed into echoes that blur with memory and imagination. When morning comes, the city resumes its daytime posture. The bell is silent. Carts carry goods instead of bodies. People speak in ordinary voices again. Yet you know that night will return, and with it the measured rhythm that now defines darkness in London. You go about your day carrying the night inside you, aware that the city has developed a second life after sunset, one marked by voices that call out loss and wheels that move quietly through sleeping streets. You know you will listen again tonight, whether you want to or not. Morning brings you back into the streets, because hunger does not pause for fear. Markets reopen with a careful stubbornness, as if commerce itself believes that routine might hold the city together. You walk toward familiar stalls, noticing how spacing has changed. Where people once pressed forward eagerly, there are now hesitant gaps, small islands of personal distance forming without discussion. Vendors watch hands more than faces. Coins are accepted with a practiced neutrality, then rubbed against cloth or dropped into separate pouches. Accounts from the period make it clear that money was suspected almost immediately. Coins pass through too many hands to feel safe. You catch yourself hesitating before paying, then feeling foolish for doing so, then paying anyway. Prices fluctuate daily. Bread costs more this week than last. Meat is harder to find, and when it appears, people argue quietly over whether it is wise to buy it at all. You hear someone mutter that animals fall sick too, which is only partly true, but fear rarely waits for accuracy. Sellers insist their goods are fresh, untouched, safe. Buyers nod without fully believing them. A strange tension fills the air. Trade must continue for the city to eat, yet every exchange feels like a calculated risk. You feel it when you accept change, when you take wrapped food, when you brush past another customer. Each moment of necessity carries a whisper of doubt. Some shopkeepers begin to close voluntarily even before orders require it. They fear the crowds, but they also fear being accused later of spreading illness. Others stay open out of desperation. Rent still waits. Debt still exists. Parish aid is limited and uneven. Surviving records suggest that economic pressure forced many to choose exposure over starvation, a decision that was never framed so bluntly at the time. One curious adaptation appears among certain traders. They arrange their goods farther back from the street, creating a shallow buffer zone. Customers point instead of touch. The practice feels awkward at first, then oddly reassuring. You notice how quickly new habits can take hold when fear provides motivation. There is talk of hoarding. You hear accusations whispered about neighbours storing food secretly. Sometimes it is true, sometimes it is not. The idea alone breeds resentment. You sense how easily survival instincts can turn people against one another, even when resources are simply scarce rather than deliberately withheld. Among the more unusual beliefs circulating is the idea that poverty itself attracts disease. Some claim that plague prefers the poorly fed and poorly clothed, and that maintaining appearances might offer protection. You see people wearing their best garments to market not for vanity but for defence. It feels absurd, and yet it makes a certain emotional sense. Researchers looking back disagree on how much market closures slowed transmission versus how much they worsened suffering. Some emphasise reduced contact. Others point to malnutrition weakening resistance. From where you stand, the trade-off is painfully visible. Empty stalls mean empty stomachs. Full stalls mean crowded streets. Money changes meaning during these weeks. It is still necessary, but it feels less solid. You begin to measure wealth not in coin, but in access. Who knows a farmer? Who has a cousin outside the city? Who can leave if they choose? These are the currencies that matter now. You notice that charity becomes more visible. Parish boxes fill more quickly. Bread is left anonymously at doors. Some of this generosity is genuine. Some is driven by fear of judgment or divine consequence. Either way, it keeps people alive. You accept help once and feel a complicated mix of gratitude and shame. As the day progresses, the market thins earlier than usual. People drift away before noon, eager to limit time among strangers. Vendors pack up with sighs, counting what little they have earned. You see exhaustion in their movements, not just physical, but moral. Every sale feels like a small ethical puzzle with no clear answer. You carry your purchases home carefully, washing your hands more often than habit requires. Water splashes into a basin clouded quickly by grime and imagined threat. You scrub anyway, finding comfort in the repetition. Cleanliness becomes a ritual of control, however imperfect. At night, you tally expenses by candlelight. The numbers look wrong. They always do lately. You wonder how long you can maintain this balance, how many weeks before something gives. You suspect you are not alone in that calculation. Outside, a cart rattles past, carrying goods instead of bodies this time. The sound reminds you that life still moves unevenly, but insistently. Trade has not collapsed. It has simply changed shape, adapting to fear the way water adapts to stone. As you lie down, stomach full enough for now, you reflect on how fragile systems reveal themselves under pressure. Markets are not just places to buy things. They are agreements, trust made visible. Tonight, that trust feels thinner than ever, stretched tight across a city that cannot afford for it to snap. You close your eyes knowing that tomorrow you will return because you must. Fear may shape your steps, but it cannot eliminate them. The market will open again and you will walk among others, balancing need against caution, carrying the quiet understanding that survival in this city is a shared negotiation renewed with every exchange. You begin to hear advice everywhere, offered freely and rarely questioned. Remedies circulate through the city like a second kind of rumour passed from mouth to mouth with urgent sincerity. Some come from physicians with formal training, others come from neighbours, midwives, apothecaries, or anyone who has survived long enough to feel authoritative. In a time like this, survival itself counts as expertise. You pass a shop where jars line the window filled with powders, roots and liquids of uncertain origin. The apothecary stands inside, calm and composed, explaining a preparation to a waiting customer. Period. Medical manuals describe such shops as central to urban health, offering both legitimate treatments and hopeful guesses. You cannot always tell which is which, and neither, you suspect, can the man behind the counter. Bloodletting remains popular, so do purges. These practices rest on the long accepted belief that illness comes from imbalance within the body. If too much of something causes sickness, then removing something must restore health. You listen as someone describes a neighbour who felt better after a bleeding, at least briefly. Another mentions someone who weakened rapidly afterward. Both stories circulate with equal weight. You notice how language shifts around medicine. People speak in terms of cleansing, opening, drawing out. Disease is imagined as something that enters and can therefore be expelled. This framework offers comfort even when results disappoint. Doing something feels better than waiting. Among the more unexpected treatments gaining traction is the use of live animals. Some people place pigeons against swollen areas, believing the creatures will draw sickness into themselves. It sounds bizarre, yet you see it attempted more than once. The desperation behind it is unmistakable. When faced with limited options, plausibility becomes flexible. Accounts written after the fact reveal that many physicians fled the city early, leaving behind apprentices or those with fewer means. This absence creates space for alternative voices to grow louder. Barber surgeons, herbalists, and self-taught healers step forward, filling the gap with confidence, if not always competence. There is disagreement among modern medical historians about whether any of these treatments had measurable benefit. A few herbs may have eased symptoms. Cleanliness likely helped more than people realised. Yet most interventions probably offered little protection against the disease itself. Still, relief is not only physical, hope has its own effect. You find yourself listening carefully, weighing suggestions even when you doubt them. Someone recommends carrying a small sachet of vinegar-soaked sponge to sniff when passing crowded places. You adopt the habit without much thought. The sharp scent cuts through the air and gives you something to do with your hands when anxiety rises. Doctors who remain often wear distinctive clothing, long coats, gloves, sometimes masks with extended beaks filled with aromatic substances. Contemporary illustrations show these outfits clearly designed to protect against corrupted air. Seeing one approach is both reassuring and unsettling. Reassuring because help exists, unsettling because the sight confirms danger. Debate continues long after these events about whether physicians truly believed their own theories or simply worked within the limits of available knowledge. Some argue they acted with genuine conviction. Others suggest a degree of performance, a need to appear decisive in the face of uncertainty. Watching them move through the streets, you sense both elements at play. Inside, Home's care becomes intimate and improvised. Family members tend to the sick with cloths, prayers, and whispered encouragement. You hear of people refusing to leave loved ones, even when it puts them at risk. These choices rarely appear in official records, yet they shape countless outcomes quietly. You also hear of charlatans, people selling miracle cures at inflated prices. Their promises are extravagant, their language absolute. You feel anger rise when you hear such stories followed by a weary understanding. Fear makes fertile ground for exploitation, and not everyone resists the temptation. As night approaches, you prepare your own small rituals. You clean surfaces. You air out bedding. You place your vinegar sponge nearby. None of it feels sufficient, but it feels intentional. Intention matters when control is scarce. Lying down, you think about how knowledge works in a crisis. It spreads unevenly, shaped by trust, authority, and emotion. Accuracy competes with urgency. In London, now medicine is not a clear path, but a crowded intersection full of voices calling you in different directions. Sleep comes slowly. Your mind replays advice heard during the day, sorting and discarding, keeping fragments that feel useful or comforting. You wonder which of these practices will be remembered later as foolish, and which as quietly sensible, for now those distinctions blur. Outside someone coughs, somewhere else a window closes. The city settles into another uneasy night. You pull the blanket closer and breathe through the sharp scent of vinegar, reminding yourself that people have always faced the unknown this way, with mixtures of knowledge, belief, and hope. Tomorrow you will hear new advice. You will consider it again, and you will keep going, because in this moment, continuing is the most reliable treatment available. Faith becomes louder as certainty fades. You notice it first in the way people enter churches more frequently, even those who once passed by without much thought. Doors stand open longer, candles burn down to stubs. The air inside these spaces feels thicker than usual, layered with breathwax and unspoken fear. You step inside not because you are suddenly devout, but because silence feels worse. Sermons stretch longer now. Ministers speak with urgency, their voices echoing off stone walls as they search for meaning in unfolding events. Surviving parish notes from this year describe crowded services, even as illness spreads a detail that feels both brave and reckless. You stand shoulder to shoulder with strangers, sharing hymns and whispered prayers, wondering whether comfort outweighs risk. The messages vary. Some clergy frame the plague as a test, a call to reflection rather than punishment. Others lean heavily into warning, urging repentance for sins, both specific and vague. You listen as guilt is distributed, generously touching everyone without discrimination. The words sink in differently depending on who hears them. Outside the churches, faith takes more personal forms. You see people pausing at shrines set into walls, tracing symbols with their fingers. Others carry small books of psalms worn from handling. Prayer becomes portable, something you can use in the street when fear spikes unexpectedly. One small but telling practice spreads quietly. Some households choose a specific hour each day to pray together regardless of who is present. Even if family members are scattered across rooms or floors, they pause at the same time. This synchronization offers a sense of unity when physical closeness feels dangerous. It is not mandated, it simply feels necessary. There is no single religious response to the plague, and that diversity becomes obvious quickly. London is filled with competing interpretations, Anglican, Puritan, Catholic, and others, each offering its own explanation and remedies of the soul. You hear arguments spill into the street, voices rising as theology collides with fear. Even belief systems strain under pressure. Later thinkers, examining this period, have pointed out how crises tend to amplify existing divisions rather than erase them. Some scholars suggest that the plague deepened religious rifts already present in the city. Others note moments of surprising cooperation across doctrinal lines. From where you stand, both seem true depending on the street, the day, and the mood. You notice how prayer changes tone over time. Early on, it sounds hopeful, almost transactional. Please protect us and we will improve. As weeks pass, the requests become simpler. Spare this house. Let this child wake tomorrow. The language strips itself down to essentials. Not all expressions of faith are solemn. You encounter people singing quietly as they walk. Not hymns exactly, but familiar tunes adapted with new words. Music becomes a way to steady breath and pace. You hum along once, surprised at how grounding it feels. Doubt walks alongside belief. You feel it in yourself and see it in others. Someone asks aloud why the faithful fall sick alongside the careless. The question hangs unanswered. No one tries to resolve it neatly. In this moment, questions matter more than answers. Printed broadsides appear with prayers promising protection if read daily. Some claim ancient origins. Others are clearly recent inventions. You see them tacked to doors and folded into pockets. Whether they work is beside the point. They offer structure, something repeatable in a world that feels increasingly unstable. You also hear quieter stories. A minister who continues visiting the sick despite the risk. A congregation that agrees to space themselves farther apart long before any order requires it. Faith here is not only belief, it is behaviour shaped by conscience and circumstance. As evening falls, bells ring for services and for deaths, sometimes indistinguishably. You realise how sound itself has become ambiguous. A call to prayer and a notice of loss can share the same tone. You listen carefully, trying to tell the difference, and often failing. At home, you light a candle before sleeping, even if you have not done so in years. The flame steadies your gaze. It gives the room a softer edge. You say a few words, quietly, not sure who you are addressing, but aware that speaking them helps. You reflect on how faith functions here, not as certainty, but as endurance. It does not promise safety. It offers companionship with fear. That distinction matters more than you expected. Outside footsteps pass. Somewhere someone prays aloud. Somewhere else someone curses softly. Both sounds belong to the same city the same night. You lie back and let them blend into a low human murmur that carries you towards sleep. Tomorrow's sermons will continue. Doubt will continue. So will belief reshaping itself to fit what remains possible. For now, you rest in the quiet knowledge that whatever you believe or question, you are not alone in doing so. London holds all of it at once, faith and fear, braided together, and you drift off wrapped in that shared uneasy devotion. You notice who remains by noticing who does not. Certain doors stay shut day after day, not marked, not guarded, simply abandoned. The well-dressed have quietly vanished. Carriages rolled out at dawn weeks ago carrying trunks servants, and the confidence that distance can solve most problems. What is left behind is a different London, thinner in wealth and thicker in necessity. You stay because staying is not really a choice. Leaving requires money, connections, and somewhere safe to go. Most people have none of those in useful combination. Household notes from the period make plain that entire families weighed the idea of flight only to abandon it within minutes. Where would they sleep? How would they eat? Who would take them in? The questions answer themselves. The streets now belong to those without options: labourers, servants, apprentices, widows, children. You recognise the same faces again and again because there are fewer newcomers passing through. Familiarity breeds a fragile sense of solidarity even as fear sharpens edges. Work does not stop, though it changes shape. You see people taking on tasks they never expected to perform. A tailor delivers bread. A porter carries messages. A woman who once cleaned houses now watches children for neighbours who cannot leave their rooms. Survival rearranges social roles quickly, without ceremony. One telling detail emerges as you move through poorer districts. The smell is stronger here. Not because people are careless, but because space and resources are limited. Fires burn less often to save fuel. Clothes are washed less frequently to conserve water. Cleanliness becomes a privilege rather than a habit. You feel this difference physically as you pass through the air heavier, the rooms darker. Some parishes attempt to help distributing food or small sums of money. Surviving parish records show both generosity and strain. Funds run low quickly. Decisions about who receives aid become uncomfortable exercises in judgment. You hear murmurs of resentment from those turned away. Charity has limits, and those limits are suddenly visible. There is an unspoken understanding among those who remain. If the plague worsens, they will face it together because there is no alternative. This shared vulnerability creates moments of unexpected cooperation. You see neighbours checking on one another, not out of friendship, but out of mutual dependence. If one household collapses, others will feel the impact. At the same time, tension simmers. Hunger shortens tempers. Fear magnifies slights. A disagreement over water access escalates quickly before being broken up by others who know conflict wastes energy. You sense how thin the margin is between cooperation and chaos. One improvised behaviour spreads quietly among those who cannot flee. People begin pooling resources within small clusters. One family cooks, another provides firewood, another watches the children. This arrangement is informal and fragile, dependent on trust and goodwill. It works until it does not. Still, for a time, it keeps people alive. Those who study this period later have never fully agreed on whether the poor suffered disproportionately because of exposure nutrition or simple lack of escape. Some analyses emphasize physical vulnerability. Others point to structural inequality long predating the plague. Walking these streets, the distinction feels academic. What matters is that the risk feels unavoidable here. Children adapt faster than adults. You notice them playing with quieter intensity, inventing games that stay close to home. They learn which doors to avoid, which adults to listen to, which rumours to ignore. Their resilience is both comforting and unsettling, a reminder of how quickly humans normalise danger. You hear people speak bitterly of those who left, accusing them of cowardice. You also hear envy plain and unadorned. Both reactions coexist easily. You feel them both yourself. Staying does not feel noble, it feels necessary. As days pass, the absence of the wealthy reshapes daily rhythms. Fewer carriages, fewer elaborate meals, less spectacle. The city feels stripped down to function. What remains are tasks that must be done regardless of who is watching. You notice how this shift affects your own sense of identity. Without the usual markers of status around you, people become defined by usefulness rather than position. Who can fetch water? Who can cook? Who can keep calm? These qualities suddenly matter more than lineage or dress. At night, conversations drift toward practical concerns rather than speculation. How much food is left? Who is coughing? Who has not been seen today? Fear is still present, but it has become quieter, more focused. Panic exhausts itself quickly when resources are limited. You lie down knowing that tomorrow will look much like today, and that familiarity is now a kind of shelter. The city has not emptied, it has concentrated. Those who remain are bound together by circumstance, sharing the same air, the same risks, the same limited hopes. As sleep approaches, you reflect on how survival often depends less on courage than on endurance. You did not choose to stay to make a statement. You stayed because you could not leave. Yet here you are, adapting, adjusting, continuing. Outside, a few windows glow softly. Somewhere nearby, someone stirs a pot. Life persists in modest ways, stripped of ornament, focused on the immediate. You close your eyes, holding on to that thought. In a city abandoned by many, those left behind learn how to keep it breathing one ordinary day at a time. You begin to notice a different kind of presence in the city, quieter but persistent. These are the people who stay not because they must, but because they believe they should. You recognize them by repetition rather than announcement. The same parish official walking the same route each morning. The same clergyman knocking on doors others avoid. The same labourers hauling loads no one else wants to touch. Their reasons vary. Some feel bound by duty, others by faith. A few by simple habit, unable to imagine themselves anywhere else. Accounts written later by city workers describe a mixture of resolve and resignation, a sense that someone had to remain to keep the machinery of London from grinding to a halt. You watch a watchman make his rounds, staff tapping lightly against the stones. His pace is steady, unhurried. He knows every turn, every doorway. When he pauses to speak with a resident, his voice stays calm, almost casual. You realise how much reassurance lives in familiarity, how authority feels different when it wears a known face. Clergy move through the streets with similar regularity. Some wear plain clothing, others more formal dress, but all share a certain visibility. They visit the sick, comfort the frightened, bury the dead, when families cannot. Letters from ministers who stay behind speak of exhaustion layered on top of conviction. They do not claim bravery. They describe obligation. There are also the workers who keep the city functioning in less visible ways. Carters who transport supplies. Bakers who rise before dawn. Water carriers who continue their routes despite whispered warnings. These people rarely appear in grand narratives, yet without them daily life would collapse entirely. One small but revealing habit emerges among these stayers. They develop routines with almost ceremonial precision. Same routes, same hours, same gestures. Routine becomes armour. By repeating known actions, they reduce the mental space available for fear. You feel this yourself as you fall into predictable patterns, finding comfort in the expected. The risks they take are not abstract. Everyone knows someone who fell ill after continuing their duties. Still, the work continues. Municipal correspondence from the time shows officials struggling to fill roles as sickness spreads. Replacement becomes difficult. Those who remain become more valuable simply by staying alive. There is disagreement among later commentators about what motivated these choices most strongly. Some emphasize religious conviction, others point to economic necessity or social pressure. The evidence supports multiple readings. Standing here watching these figures pass by day after day, you sense that motivation rarely comes from a single source. It is braided together from belief, habit, fear, and identity. You speak briefly with a parish clerk, once exchanging a few words about the weather. He looks tired, but his hands move efficiently as he works. When you thank him, he seems surprised. The work does not feel heroic to him. It feels required. At times, resentment surfaces. You hear complaints that officials enforce rules they do not fully understand, or that clergy risk spreading illness through visits. These criticisms exist alongside gratitude. People depend on those who stay even when they question their choices. One unexpected outcome of this persistence is a strengthening of local ties. You see people greeting the same workers by name, offering small gifts, food, or simple kindness. These gestures are not dramatic. They are quiet acknowledgements that someone is still showing up. As days turn into weeks, the physical toll becomes more apparent. Shoulders slump, voices roughen, movements slow slightly, yet absence feels worse than fatigue. When someone fails to appear on their usual route, concern spreads quickly. Has he fallen ill? Has he fled? Has something worse happened? The question hangs until answered. You begin to understand that staying is not a single decision, but a series of daily renewals. Each morning, these individuals wake and choose again to step into the city as it is now, not as it was. That choice is rarely celebrated, it simply unfolds. At night, you reflect on how easily these people might be forgotten later. History often favours dramatic exits over quiet persistence. Yet it is persistence that keeps the city alive enough to recover at all. You lie down knowing that tomorrow you will see many of the same faces again, moving through the same streets, performing the same necessary tasks. Their presence steadies the city more than any proclamation could. Outside, footsteps pass with familiar rhythm. A voice calls out the hour. Somewhere nearby, a door opens and closes. The city continues, not because it is fearless, but because enough people decide day after day that stopping is not an option. You let that thought settle as sleep arrives, carried by the quiet assurance that duty, however unremarkable it appears, can hold a city together when little else will. Absence reshapes the city in ways you did not expect. It is not just that certain houses stand empty, it is that entire patterns of movement disappear. You notice it in the mornings first. Fewer servants hurry through the streets, fewer doors open at once. The rhythm of wealth leaving behind only its echo feels strangely hollow. You pass large homes with shutters closed tight, their courtyards silent. These families left weeks ago, sometimes in the night, sometimes with enough notice to draw stares. Written correspondence from the time confirms that many members of the gentry and merchant class retreated to country estates or rented lodgings far from the city. Distance was believed to be the strongest protection money could buy. What surprises you is not that they left, but how quickly their absence becomes normal. The city adjusts. Streets feel wider, markets grow quieter, certain trades suffer immediately. Tailors who once dressed fine households now wait idly. Coachmen sit with nothing to drive. Luxury collapses faster than necessity. You hear bitterness in some voices. Not loud, not revolutionary, but sharp enough to cut. People note which families fled early and which hesitated. They remember who paid wages in advance and who vanished without settling accounts. Memory becomes a ledger, informal but unforgiving. Others speak with a kind of resigned understanding. If they had the means, they say they would have gone too. Survival feels like a practical choice rather than a moral one. You feel that pull yourself, the mental exercise of imagining escape, even when you know it is impossible. One revealing shift occurs inside the abandoned houses. They do not stay empty for long. Caretakers move in. Relatives remain behind. In some cases, poorer families quietly occupy unused rooms with the owner's tacit permission. These arrangements are rarely formalised, but they alter the social geography of entire streets. Some households leave behind instructions lists and rules for those who remain. You hear of servants tasked with maintaining properties in near isolation, forbidden from leaving, yet responsible for keeping homes intact. The irony is not lost on anyone. Freedom and confinement trade places depending on circumstance. People who study this period later have debated whether the flight of the wealthy reduced overall mortality or merely shifted risk onto those who could not leave. Some interpretations suggest fewer bodies in the city slowed transmission. Others argue that essential workers faced greater danger precisely because elites removed themselves. Watching the city thin and strain at the same time, you sense how both views could hold truth. You notice how status becomes less visible when those who display it are gone. Fine clothing appears less often. Carriages no longer dominate intersections. People are identified more by role than rank. Who delivers food? Who enforces rules? Who offers comfort? These distinctions matter more now. The absence also affects morale. For some it deepens despair. It feels like abandonment proof that survival favours those with means. For others it simplifies life. Without the pressure of hierarchy, interactions become more direct. You speak to people you might never have addressed before, united by shared conditions. Children adapt quickly. They play in spaces once claimed by others, running through quieter streets, inventing games that fill the emptiness. Their laughter echoes differently now, carrying farther. It feels both hopeful and eerie. At night, the darkness seems deeper in areas where many have fled. Fewer windows glow, fewer voices carry. The city feels uneven pockets of life surrounded by stillness. You choose your routes carefully, not from fear of crime, so much as fear of silence. You begin to understand that departure is not just physical. It leaves psychological gaps as well. Those who remain must reinterpret their place in the city. Without certain figures present, responsibility shifts downward and outward. People step into roles they never expected to fill. As days pass, the idea of return becomes a quiet fixation. When will they come back? Under what conditions? Who will be missing when they do? These questions circulate without answers. Time stretches. You lie down thinking about how cities are not just buildings but agreements. When some participants leave, the agreement changes. Those still present renegotiate daily what it means to belong, to endure, to carry on without the people who once defined the upper edges of the city. Outside, a breeze moves through empty courtyards, stirring dust where footsteps once fell regularly. Somewhere nearby, someone lights a candle in a house that used to belong to someone else. Life fills the spaces it can. You close your eyes, aware that absence has weight. It presses just as surely as crowding once did. Yet you are still here, adjusting to a city that feels stripped and exposed, waiting for the moment when familiar faces might return, even as you quietly suspect that nothing will ever quite look the same again. Children move through the city differently than adults do. You notice it as soon as you begin paying attention. Where grown-ups hesitate, children weave. Where adults pause to calculate risk, children adapt without naming the danger. They learn the new rules quickly, not because they understand them, but because change is already familiar territory. You see them in doorways, sitting on steps, chalking shapes onto stone, when chalk can be found. Play has shrunk in scale. No more running crowds, no shouting games that draw attention. Instead, there are clapping patterns, whispered rhymes, small objects traded and examined with solemn importance. Their voices drop instinctively when an adult passes, as if they sense that loudness itself has become risky. Families keep children closer now, not always indoors, but nearer to home. Windows become boundaries. A mother calls her son back sharply when he wanders too far. The boy returns without protest, already learning that obedience has taken on new urgency. Childhood here does not end, but it tightens. Parish notes and household letters from the time reveal that children made up a significant portion of the population in London during these years. Large families were common, and survival to adulthood was never guaranteed, even in peaceful times. This background reality shapes how people respond now. Loss is feared, but it is not unfamiliar. That familiarity does not make it easier. It simply changes the shape of grief. You notice how explanations offered to children vary widely. Some adults speak plainly, describing sickness in simple terms. Others avoid the subject entirely, deflecting questions with distraction or silence. A few lean heavily on religious language, framing events as part of a larger plan. Children absorb these narratives unevenly, piecing together meaning from tone as much as content. One small habit spreads among families with young ones. Parents invent tasks, simple repetitive duties that give children purpose and structure. Fetching water from the next room, counting candles, folding cloth. These tasks do not truly help much, but they anchor restless energy and give days a predictable rhythm. You see how calm follows routine, even for the very young. There are moments of startling insight. A child asks why certain houses have guards while others do not. Another wonders aloud why prayers do not seem to work the same way every time. Adults answer carefully, if at all. You sense how children perceive inconsistencies quickly, even when they lack the language to articulate them fully. You also notice how illness is discussed among children themselves. It becomes a kind of folklore traded in fragments. Someone knows a cousin who recovered. Someone else heard that holding your breath when passing a marked door helps. These stories circulate not as facts but as tools for managing fear. Children, like adults, create explanations that let them keep moving. Later examinations of mortality records suggest that children were affected unevenly by the plague, with some age groups suffering more than others. Yet the records themselves are incomplete, shaped by who was counted and how. The numbers leave gaps large enough to swallow individual stories whole. Watching children at play, now you feel the weight of those missing details. Despite everything, laughter still appears. It surprises you each time. A sudden giggle breaks the tension like a crack in ice. Adults glance over instinctively, then relax when they see nothing is wrong. Laughter becomes precious something briefly held before being released again into caution. You witness acts of protection that are almost invisible. An older child guiding a younger one away from a crowd. A group forming a loose circle to keep strangers at a distance. These behaviours are not taught explicitly. They emerge naturally, shaped by observation and imitation. Children learn by watching fear move through adults, even when adults try to hide it. At night, you hear children crying more often than before. Not always loudly. Sometimes it is a whimper, sometimes a half-formed call that fades when comfort arrives. Sleep is harder for them now. The city's nighttime sounds have changed, and children are sensitive to shifts adults pretend not to notice. Some parents choose to send children away if they can. A relative in the countryside, a family friend outside the walls. These separations are abrupt and emotionally costly. You see children leave carrying small bundles, faces tight with confusion. Adults wave too cheerfully, hiding worry behind reassurance. The city absorbs these departures quietly. Those who remain grow up faster, though not all at once. Maturity comes in uneven patches. A child may show startling composure one moment and collapse into fear the next. You learn not to expect consistency, neither do they. You reflect on how childhood adapts rather than disappears. Games change, stories change, boundaries shift, yet curiosity persists. You catch a child watching the street intently, absorbing patterns adults overlook. Who passes, who does not, when bells ring, when they do not. This quiet attention feels important, a survival skill forming without instruction. As the day ends, you see children gathered close to family, leaning into familiar bodies for reassurance. Touch becomes more deliberate now, less casual, a hand held longer, a head resting against a shoulder. These gestures say what words cannot. You lie down later thinking about how the plague reshapes childhood without fully erasing it. Innocence thins, but it does not vanish. Instead it bends, accommodating fear alongside play. You realise that many of the children you see now will remember this time not as a single event, but as a mood, a feeling that lingers long after details fade. Outside, a child's voice drifts briefly through an open window, then quiets. The city exhales again. You close your eyes, knowing that while adults struggle to make sense of what is happening, children are already learning how to live inside uncertainty. That lesson learned early and quietly may shape them long after the streets return to something like normal. Animals draw attention in new ways now. You notice it first with the dogs. They seem fewer than before, and the ones you see are watched carefully as if their presence alone requires explanation. Cats too slip through the streets with a different kind of scrutiny. People track them with their eyes, assigning meaning to movement that once went unnoticed. Stories circulate quickly. Someone insists animals carry sickness on their fur. Someone else claims they sense danger before humans do. Neither claim rests on proof, yet both find eager listeners. In a city searching for patterns, anything that moves independently becomes suspect. Orders soon follow beliefs. Notices appear instructing the destruction of stray dogs and cats. This directive is recorded plainly in municipal instructions of the time a decision made with confidence that feels chilling in its certainty. The logic seems simple enough. Fewer animals means fewer carriers. Whether that logic holds up is another matter entirely. You witness the outcome in small, unsettling moments. A man chasing a dog from a doorway. A child crying as a cat disappears from a familiar stoop. The streets feel oddly quieter without the usual animal sounds, as if an invisible layer of life has been stripped away. You miss the casual reassurance of movement that is not human. Rats are discussed constantly, though rarely seen directly. They exist more as an idea than a presence, blamed for almost everything unpleasant. People point to droppings, to gnawed wood, to any sign that suggests infestation. The accusation feels satisfying because it offers a target that cannot protest. One curious belief gains traction alongside these measures. Some people begin keeping caged birds near windows, watching them for signs of distress. If the bird remains lively, the air must be safe. If it droops, danger is near. This practice spreads quietly, a domestic ritual born of observation rather than instruction. You see a sparrow fluttering in a cage and feel a pang you cannot quite explain. Later interpretations of the plague period disagree on the role animals actually played in spreading disease. Some analyses focus on fleas and rodents. Others emphasize human contact as the primary driver. The surviving evidence points in several directions at once, depending on which traces are followed. For those living through it, the debate offers little comfort. Action feels necessary regardless of accuracy. You notice how blame settles where fear cannot find resolution. Animals cannot argue their innocence. They do not belong to parishes or families. Removing them feels like restoring order, even if the effect is more emotional than practical. The city breathes easier for a moment, convinced it has done something decisive. At the same time, people cling more tightly to animals that remain inside homes. Dogs that are owned cats, that acclaim birds, that sing softly in cages. These animals are no longer background companions. They become barometers of safety and sources of comfort. You see someone stroke a dog slowly, as if grounding themselves through touch. The absence of animals changes daily rhythms. Waste accumulates differently. Insects seem more noticeable. Nights feel emptier. The city's ecosystem shifts subtly, though no one names it that way. You sense that something has been disturbed, even if you cannot articulate what. Children react strongly to these changes. They ask where the animals went. Adults answer vaguely, avoiding details. Loss comes in small forms, now not always recognised as such. A missing cat, a silent corner where birds once gathered. These absences add to the overall feeling that the city is shedding parts of itself. You overhear arguments about whether these measures are helping. Some claim fewer deaths followed the removals. Others point out that sickness continued regardless. The conversation circles without resolution, repeating, with slight variations in taverns and doorways. Uncertainty persists, but conviction remains strong. One evening, you see a rat dart across the street despite everything. It disappears into a drain, quick and unbothered. The sight unsettles you more than the absence of animals ever did. It suggests that control is an illusion, that the city's efforts may be misdirected. As days pass, attention slowly shifts elsewhere. New concerns arise. New targets for anxiety present themselves. The animal panic fades, leaving behind a quieter city and a lingering sense of regret. People do not often speak of what was lost, preferring to focus on what still threatens. At home, You notice how silence fills spaces once occupied by small sounds. You miss the scratching, the barking, the fluttering. These sounds once reminded you that life persisted independently of human worry. Without them, the city feels more tightly wound around itself. You reflect on how fear demands sacrifices often from those least able to defend themselves. Animals become symbols rather than beings swept into human attempts to impose meaning on chaos. It is easier to act decisively against something simple than to sit with complexity. As night falls, you hear fewer interruptions, no barking, no sudden movement. The stillness feels heavy, pressing inward. You lie down, aware that the city has narrowed its focus again, discarding one explanation in favour of the next. Sleep comes slowly. Your thoughts linger on how quickly certainty can form when people are desperate for control. You remind yourself that tomorrow will bring new theories, new actions, new reassurances. For now, the streets are quiet, and the absence of animal life becomes just another layer of the city's altered soundscape, one more change you learn to live with as London continues its uneasy adjustment. Homes begin to feel different from the inside. You notice it not all at once, but in pieces. The air seems heavier even when windows are open. Familiar rooms feel smaller, as if walls have crept inward overnight. Smell becomes the most persistent companion. Smoke from low fires. Damp fabric that never quite dries. The faint sourness of fear settling into wood and cloth. You spend more time indoors now, whether you intend to or not. Streets feel unpredictable, while home offers a sense of boundary, however imperfect. Yet safety comes with its own discomfort. When someone falls ill inside a house, the entire interior changes character. Rooms become zones. Objects become suspect. Silence stretches. Household journals from the period describe families rearranging living spaces almost immediately. Beds are moved. Screens are improvised from hanging cloth. Corners once used for storage become places of rest or isolation. You feel how quickly a home can turn from shelter into system, each part assigned a new role. Sound behaves strangely indoors. Coughing echoes more than it should. Footsteps feel louder. Every small noise carries significance. You find yourself listening constantly, interpreting pauses and patterns. Someone has stopped moving. Someone has shifted in sleep. Someone is breathing more shallowly than before. The house teaches you vigilance. Smell becomes a form of information. You notice how people comment on it openly now. This room smells wrong. That bedding needs air. Someone burns herbs not for comfort, but as a signal that something is being done. The scent of rosemary, juniper or vinegar fills enclosed spaces, sharp and persistent. These smells mix with human presence until they feel inseparable. One domestic habit spreads quietly. Families keep bowls of water near beds, changing them, often convinced that the liquid absorbs harmful air. The water is thrown out ceremoniously, usually into the street. No one can explain exactly how this helps, but repetition offers reassurance. You catch yourself watching the surface of the water, half expecting it to reveal something. People speak less inside now. Conversations shrink to essentials. There is a sense that words themselves might stir trouble. When speech happens, it is deliberate. A question, an answer, a reassurance offered carefully, as if too much hope might provoke disappointment. Those examining household arrangements later have noted how confinement altered family dynamics. Proximity intensified everything. Affection deepened. Irritation sharpened. Old grievances resurfaced without anywhere to retreat. You feel this pressure building even in homes untouched by illness. The city presses inward and homes must absorb the strain. Light becomes important. You open shutters more often even when it lets in cold or noise. Darkness feels risky now, associated with decline and despair. Sunlight, however weak, suggests movement and continuity. You arrange your day around it, sitting where it falls longest. At the same time, privacy erodes further. Windows remain open for air exposing interiors to the street. Passers-by glimpse scenes never meant to be shared. Someone sleeping at midday. Someone washing cloth repeatedly. Someone sitting very still. These accidental witnesses create a sense of shared vulnerability. Food smells linger longer indoors. Cooking becomes cautious, simplified. Strong flavours are avoided by some, embraced by others. You notice how appetite changes with stress. Some eat less. Some eat constantly seeking comfort. Meals lose ceremony but gain urgency. Eating becomes another form of maintenance. Children inside these houses learn new boundaries. They are told where they can sit, what they can touch, when they must be quiet. The rules shift daily. You see confusion flicker across young faces, followed by adaptation. Even indoors, childhood adjusts. As night falls, the house grows louder again. The city quiets, leaving interior sounds exposed. You lie awake counting breaths, yours and others. You notice how the house settles wood, contracting fabric rustling. These familiar sounds feel newly intimate, as if the building itself is listening along with you. You think about how homes usually hold memories of joy, conflict, routine. Now they also hold fear. The walls absorb it. The floors carry it. You imagine future occupants feeling something they cannot name, a lingering unease embedded in familiar spaces. Eventually, exhaustion softens your vigilance. Sleep comes in shallow waves. You wake easily, then drift again. Each time you orient yourself by smell and sound, confirming that for now, all is as it was when you closed your eyes. Morning arrives quietly. Light filters in. The house loosens its grip just a little. You rise knowing that today, like yesterday, the interior of your home will be both refuge and test. You will clean, you will air, you will adjust. The house will hold you as best it can, bearing the weight of human worry along with you. You step into the day aware that the plague does not only change streets and numbers, it reshapes the most private spaces, teaching homes to carry fear alongside ordinary life. And still within these altered walls, people persist, breathing, moving, adapting, waiting for the moment when rooms can return to being simply rooms again. You learn to recognize the watchers by their stillness. They stand where movement once flowed freely, leaning against posts or sitting on stools near sealed doors. Their presence changes the shape of the street. People slow instinctively, voices soften, eyes glance and slide away. These men and women are not guards in the grand sense. They are neighbours hired or compelled to keep others inside. When a house is closed, someone must ensure it stays that way. This task falls to watchmen appointed by the parish, sometimes paid, sometimes promised future favour. You see them early in the morning, wrapped in cloaks, stamping their feet against the cold. They carry simple tools, a staff, a whistle, occasionally a paper listing names and dates. Nothing about them looks imposing. Their authority comes from the situation, not the uniform. You walk past a watched house and feel the tension immediately. Inside, people shift behind windows. Outside, the watcher pretends not to notice. This performance is mutual, a fragile agreement that no one will push too hard against the boundary, at least not yet. You feel sympathy tug in both directions. It becomes clear that enforcement is uneven. Some watchers take their role seriously, refusing even shouted requests. Others bend quietly, stepping aside to allow food to pass through a door or messages to slip out. You hear of bribes changing hands, of favours exchanged. None of this surprises you. Rules stretch under pressure the way wood bends before it breaks. You notice how difficult it is to recruit people for this work. Standing beside sickness is not appealing, and payment is modest. Those who accept often do so because they have little to lose. An injury that limits other labour, a reputation already marked, a need that outweighs fear. You see the toll it takes quickly. Faces grow drawn. Eyes scan constantly. There is resentment too. Some people believe the watchers enjoy their power. Others think they're simply trapped like everyone else. Arguments flare occasionally. Someone demands release. Someone else threatens to call authorities. The watcher listens impassive because responding emotionally would make the job impossible. Inside the sealed houses, time stretches painfully. You hear stories of boredom turning into despair, of families counting days on walls, of children asking when they can go outside again. The watchers become the only link to the world beyond a role that sits heavily on both sides of the door. People talk about whether confinement helps or harms, but the talk never settles into agreement. Some point to houses that remain closed without further illness. Others mention entire families lost behind locked doors. Evidence piles up in conflicting piles, and the city keeps enforcing because stopping feels more dangerous than continuing. One small behaviour spreads quietly among watchers themselves. They avoid standing directly in front of doors whenever possible. Instead, they angle their bodies, creating a sense of distance without abandoning their post. It is a compromise between duty and instinct, a way to stay present without feeling consumed. At night, the work becomes lonelier. The city empties faster now, leaving watchers alone with their thoughts. Lamps flicker, footsteps echo and vanish. You imagine how it feels to hear coughing from behind a door and know you cannot help directly. That helplessness wears at people faster than fatigue. You speak briefly with a watcher, once offering a cup of water. He hesitates, then accepts. His voice is quiet, careful. He mentions nothing of fear, only that the hours feel long. You part without ceremony, both of you aware that kindness must remain brief. Some households attempt escape. You hear of people slipping out windows at dawn or bribing watchers to look the other way. These stories travel fast, wrapped in equal parts admiration and condemnation. Escape feels heroic to some, selfish to others. The city does not settle the argument. It lets it linger. The presence of watchers changes how streets feel even beyond the sealed houses. Their visibility reminds everyone of consequences. It encourages compliance elsewhere, reducing the need for confrontation. Fear polices behaviour as effectively as authority. As days pass, you see watchers replaced quietly when they fall ill or vanish. No announcements are made. A new figure appears in the same spot, often looking uncertain at first. The continuity of enforcement matters more than who performs it. This realization unsettles you more than open cruelty would. You reflect on how surveillance alters relationships. Neighbours become enforcers. Familiar faces take on unfamiliar roles. Trust shifts awkwardly, stretched between compassion and caution. The city learns to live under watch, adapting routines to avoid attention. At home, you find yourself adjusting your own behaviour unconsciously. You close doors more carefully. You limit visits. You imagine how your house might look from the outside if it was sealed. This imagined gaze shapes choices even in freedom. As night deepens, you hear a watcher cough and clear his throat. The sound carries farther than it should. You hold your breath briefly, then release it. The watcher remains. The house remains sealed. The city remains in its uneasy balance. You lie down thinking about how control operates here, not as an overwhelming force, but as a network of tired individuals holding lines they did not draw. The watchers are not villains or heroes. They are another layer of the city's response, imperfect and human. Sleep comes slowly shaped by images of doors and thresholds. You dream of standing on one side, then the other, never fully certain where safety lies. When you wake, morning light filters in, and you know the watchers will still be there, standing quietly between freedom and confinement, doing their work as the city continues to negotiate its uneasy survival. Death becomes organised. That is the strangest part. You do not encounter chaos so much as routine shaped carefully to keep panic from spilling over. Bodies are moved quietly, efficiently, and mostly out of sight. The city does not want to look directly at what is happening, so it develops systems to look past it. You learn the timing quickly. Those who die during the day are kept where they are until night. Windows stay closed. Curtains remain drawn. Neighbours often know anyway. Sound travels. Smell travels. Absence travels fastest of all. By evening, the street feels different, as if it is waiting. Burial grounds expand beyond their original boundaries. Existing churchyards cannot hold what is coming. Trenches are dug deeper and wider on the outskirts, their locations chosen for practicality rather than ceremony. People speak of them in lowered voices, as if naming them too clearly might invite proximity. You never see the full process in daylight. That is intentional. Removal happens after dark, when fewer eyes are watching and fewer questions are asked. Lanterns glow briefly, then vanish. Wheels creak. A door opens and closes. By morning, the house appears unchanged except for its stillness. This approach is not born of callousness. City leaders understand that visible disorder feeds fear. Keeping death orderly feels like containment of a different kind. The system relies on speed and anonymity. Names are rarely spoken aloud once a body leaves a house. The city counts rather than mourns publicly. You notice how mourning changes shape. Funerals as you once knew them disappear almost entirely. No processions, no gatherings. No shared rituals beyond brief prayers at windows or doors. Grief becomes private, compressed into moments stolen between tasks. People learn to swallow it quickly, not because it hurts less, but because lingering feels dangerous. One unsettling habit appears among those who live near burial sites. They avoid looking directly at the ground. Eyes lift to the horizon or drop to shoes. This avoidance feels instinctive, a way of maintaining distance from what cannot be undone. You catch yourself doing the same without realizing it. Those who work the burials develop their own rhythms. They speak little. They move with practiced efficiency. Clothing is chosen for durability rather than appearance. You hear stories of men sleeping during the day and working through the night for weeks at a time. Exhaustion blunts emotion, making the work possible. There are whispers that some bodies are buried too quickly, that mistakes happen. Someone claims to have heard movement from a trench. Another insists it is impossible. These stories spread because they sit at the edge of fear, where imagination thrives. Whether true or not, they add to the weight carried by those who listen. People who later examined burial records have noted irregularities. Dates blur, causes repeat, totals fluctuate. The documents tell part of the story, but not all of it. Much is lost in the effort to keep pace. Standing here, you feel how record-keeping struggles to keep up with reality. You begin to mark time differently, not by days, but by removals, by which houses have gone quiet, by which streets have changed character overnight. The city becomes a shifting map of absence, redrawn continually. Children ask where people have gone. Adults answer vaguely. They've been taken care of. They are resting. The words feel insufficient, but they are all that fit. Truth is heavy, and children already carry enough. At night, you listen carefully when carts pass. You count how many stop nearby. You note how long they linger. This information serves no real purpose yet. Your mind gathers it automatically, searching for patterns that might offer warning or reassurance. Despite everything, there is care in the process. Bodies are covered. Prayers are sometimes whispered. Tools are cleaned. These small acts matter. They preserve a sense of dignity in a system that risks reducing people to cargo. You hold on to that thought when the scale feels overwhelming. Morning always follows. The city wakes. Streets are swept. Markets reopen. It feels almost disrespectful how quickly life resumes, yet stopping entirely would invite collapse. Balance is maintained through repetition. You walk past a churchyard and notice fresh earth darker than the surrounding ground. No marker, no name, just soil settling. You pause briefly, then move on, because pausing too long feels unsafe emotionally, if not physically. As evening returns, you feel the familiar tightening in your chest. Another night, another round, another adjustment to what once felt unthinkable. You realise that endurance now depends on compartmentalisation. You carry what you can and set the rest aside, trusting that grief will wait. You lie down, aware that the city has learned how to handle death without stopping. This knowledge is both impressive and terrifying. It allows survival at scale, but it demands a certain emotional numbness in return. Sleep comes unevenly. You dream of earth and wheels and muffled voices. When you wake, light filters in again, and the city continues. You rise knowing that tomorrow the system will repeat itself quietly, efficiently, and with just enough humanity to keep people moving forward one day at a time. The weather becomes something you pay attention to with new intensity. Not casually, not as background conversation, but as a factor that might tilt the balance one way or another. You wake and check the sky before you check your own body. The quality of the air feels important now, as if it carries intention. Summer heat settles over London in a heavy layer. It clings to skin and fabric, making movement slow and irritable. Windows stay open despite the risks, because breathing warm, stagnant air feels worse than imagined danger. You notice how sweat gathers more quickly, how smells intensify, how patience thins along with tempers. People talk constantly about whether heat worsens sickness or burns it away. Some insist that cold dampness is the true enemy, pointing to past outbreaks that faded with warmer months. Others claim the heat stirs corruption in the air, making everything more dangerous. You listen to these debates without expecting resolution. Each theory carries just enough sense to feel plausible. You observe small changes in behaviour tied directly to temperature. On cooler mornings, people move more freely. Conversations last longer. Shoulders relax. On hot afternoons, streets empty faster. Shutters close. Everyone retreats indoors to conserve energy. The city breathes differently depending on the weather. Rain brings its own complications. When it falls, it washes filth from the streets, but also drives people into closer quarters. You stand under an overhang with strangers during a sudden downpour, aware of the irony. Clean streets, crowded shelter, relief and risk intertwined. One practical adjustment appears across many households. Bedding is aired more often, lifted and shaken even when it draws attention. Sunlight is treated like a cleansing force welcomed into rooms, despite the heat it brings. You see mattresses propped against walls, blankets draped over railings, an entire city trying to dry itself out. You hear that deaths seem to slow slightly during certain weeks, then rise again without warning. The pattern resists easy explanation. Some people credit the weather, others dismiss coincidence. Parish tallies offer numbers but no answers. The hope that seasons might solve what people cannot is tempting but unreliable. Those who later study these fluctuations point out that many variables change at once. Weather movement, crowding, exhaustion, cause and effect blur together. Living through it, you feel how much people want to believe that something external might intervene, that time itself might heal what effort cannot. At night, the heat makes sleep restless. You toss listening to insects buzz near open windows. Candles burn lower to avoid adding warmth. Sweat sticks sheets to skin. You wake often disoriented, unsure whether the discomfort is from temperature or worry. Both feel equally present. You notice how conversation shifts with the weather as well. On tolerable days, people speculate about improvement. On oppressive ones, talk grows darker. Hope appears fragile, easily wilted by humidity. You find yourself monitoring your own mood, tracing it back to the sky. Children suffer differently in the heat. They grow quiet, listless, conserving energy. Adults snap more easily, then apologize. Water becomes precious again, not just for cleanliness, but for cooling. You drink more slowly, aware of how quickly supplies can thin. One curious habit spreads during the hottest days. People sit on doorsteps late into the evening, lingering outdoors long after sunset. They talk softly, sharing air that feels marginally lighter. These gatherings are cautious, spaced, but meaningful. Night becomes a refuge rather than a threat, at least briefly. Then the weather shifts again. A cooler spell arrives, and with it, a subtle lift in mood. People comment on it openly, grateful for relief. You hear laughter more often. Work feels manageable again. The city straightens its back, encouraged by the change. You catch yourself assigning too much meaning to these fluctuations. A good day feels like progress. A bad day feels like failure. You remind yourself that neither is permanent. Still, the temptation to read the sky like a forecast for survival is strong. As summer wears on, fatigue accumulates. Heat drains reserves already stretched thin. You see it in slower steps, in longer pauses before answers. The city does not collapse, but it sags under its own persistence. When rain returns, washing the air and cooling streets, you feel a cautious gratitude. You breathe more deeply. You sleep more soundly. You allow yourself a small measure of optimism, knowing it may not last. You realise that weather has always shaped human experience, but now it feels amplified, given responsibility it cannot fully bear. It becomes a companion in fear and hope, blamed when things worsen, praised when they ease. As you lie down one evening after a cooler day, you listen to the softened sounds of the city. Fewer restless movements, fewer complaints. The air feels kinder. You know that tomorrow may undo this comfort, but for now it is enough. You drift towards sleep, thinking about how survival often depends on factors beyond control. Heat, rain, wind. The sky does not care about human plans, yet humans build meaning from its moods. Tonight the air allows rest. You accept the gift, quietly, letting the rhythm of breathing sync with the cooler night, aware that even small mercies matter when endurance is measured one day at a time. News does not arrive all at once. It seeps in, carried by footsteps, breath, and chance encounters. You learn things accidentally now. A sentence overheard while passing a doorway. A remark dropped at the well. A look exchanged between two people who think no one is watching. Information travels the way water does, finding gaps, pooling unevenly. There is no single source you trust completely. Official notices appear, but they lag behind lived experience. By the time something is printed, the city has already adjusted around it. You find yourself relying more on patterns than announcements. Which streets feel quieter? Which shops stop opening? Which voices are missing? Messengers move constantly, not in any organised system, but as part of daily necessity. People carry letters tucked into coats, folded small and guarded carefully. Some are sent beyond the city asking for help or offering reassurance. Others circulate within London itself, warning relatives, sharing observations, asking simple questions like, "Are you well?" You watch a man read a letter twice, then stand very still. He folds it slowly and places it inside his shirt, as if keeping it close might change its meaning. He does not speak of it, but the way he walks afterward tells you enough. Rumours change as they move. By the time a story reaches you, it has passed through several mouths, each shaping it slightly. A single death becomes 3. A recovery becomes uncertain. Details blur, but emotion sharpens. Fear adds weight. Hope adds shine. Some people keep lists now, names of streets to avoid, houses that have gone quiet, friends they have not heard from. These lists are private, scribbled on scraps of paper tucked away at night. You start one yourself without planning to. It grows quickly, then stops abruptly when adding another name feels like tempting fate. Public spaces become information exchanges, Wells Market's doorways. People ask casual questions that are not casual at all. Have you seen him lately? Is that shop still open? Did you hear about the house on the corner? Answers are offered carefully, often with qualifiers. I think so. I heard something. I am not sure. There is a particular kind of silence that follows bad news. You notice it spreading through a group like a held breath. No one rushes to speak. Words feel dangerous, as if saying too much might make it permanent. Eventually, someone changes the subject deliberately, and everyone accepts the shift gratefully. Pamphlets still circulate, though their influence feels diminished. Bold claims tire people now. Certainty sounds suspicious. You glance at printed words and weigh them against what you have seen with your own eyes. Experience has become your primary reference. You begin to notice how geography shapes information. Neighbourhoods closer together share news faster. Outlying areas lag behind, sometimes dangerously so. A street can feel calm while the next one over braces itself. The city does not move as one body. It fractures into pockets of awareness. At night, you replay conversations in your head, trying to piece together a clearer picture. You adjust your plans based on what you think you know. Avoid this route. Delay that visit. Check on this person tomorrow. Your mind becomes a map, constantly redrawn. Children carry news too often without understanding its weight. They repeat phrases they have heard stripped of context. Someone died. Someone left. Someone is sick. Adults listen carefully, correcting gently when needed, but absorbing the information all the same. Even second-hand fragments matter. There are moments where news brings relief, a neighbour recovers, a street reopens, a family returns after weeks away. These pieces spread quickly passed on with quiet smiles. Good news feels fragile, handled carefully to avoid breaking it. You realise how exhausting this constant vigilance is. Listening, interpreting, adjusting. There is no off switch. Even rest feels provisional, interrupted by the possibility that something has changed while you slept. Some people withdraw entirely, choosing ignorance over anxiety. They stop asking questions. They avoid gatherings. They focus inward, shrinking their world to what they can control. You understand the appeal even as you resist it. Knowing feels painful, but not knowing feels worse. You notice how trust shifts. Certain voices gain weight because they have been right before. Others lose credibility quietly. No confrontations are needed. People simply stop listening. Authority here is earned through accuracy, not position. As days pass, the flow of news shapes the city's emotional weather. A morning filled with bad tidings feels heavier, slower. An afternoon with even a hint of improvement lifts spirits noticeably. You feel these swings in yourself, your mood rising and falling with the collective pulse. There's no final confirmation of anything. No moment when the story resolves. Information continues to arrive, incomplete, contradictory, and emotionally charged. You learn to live inside that uncertainty, making decisions with partial knowledge and hoping it is enough. One evening you hear laughter drifting from a nearby window. It surprises you. You listen closer and realise it is not denial, it is relief. Someone has received good news. You do not know what it is, and you do not need to. The sound alone reminds you that not all messages carry loss. As night settles, you organise what you have heard into something manageable. You choose which pieces to hold and which to let fade. You cannot carry everything. No one can. You lie down knowing that by morning the city will know something new. Something will have changed. A door will open or close. A voice will be missing or returned. News will continue its uneven journey through London, shaping choices and fears, one conversation at a time. Sleep comes with effort. Your mind hums softly, replaying fragments, assembling patterns. Eventually exhaustion wins. You drift off, aware that even as you rest, information is moving through the city, quietly rewriting the map you will wake up to tomorrow. Entertainment does not vanish. It shrinks, bends, and learns to survive quietly. You feel its absence first, then its subtle return in altered forms. The theatres are closed now, their doors locked, and notices pasted over familiar posters. Streets, once busy with evening crowds, fall dark earlier, leaving behind a sense of unfinished expectation. You miss the noise more than the performances themselves, the chatter, the sense of shared anticipation. Without it, nights feel longer, yet people do not simply stop seeking diversion. They adapt, drawing comfort from whatever fits inside new limits. Music slips indoors. You hear it through walls rather than in halls. A fiddle played softly in a neighbouring room. A lute, plucked hesitantly, as if the player is unsure whether sound is welcome. These private concerts are brief and unannounced, ending the moment someone fears they have drawn attention. Storytelling resurfaces as a nightly habit. Families sit close and trade familiar tales, not for novelty, but for predictability. The same stories repeat their endings known well in advance. That certainty matters. You find yourself listening with half your attention, soothed by rhythm more than content. Games become smaller. Dice and cards are played quietly, sometimes for stakes, sometimes simply to pass time. Laughter erupts, then is quickly stifled, followed by apologies. Even joy feels something you must manage carefully now. Printed entertainment changes tone as well. Satirical pamphlets fade, replaced by moral tales and comforting verse. You read by candlelight, noticing how writing meant to distract now leans toward reassurance. The words promise endurance rather than escape. One evening, you're invited to listen to a neighbour read aloud from a book. The invitation feels intimate, almost daring. You sit apart, careful not to crowd. The reader's voice wavers at first, then steadies. For an hour the city recedes. You are aware of how powerful this simple act feels, how rare undivided attention has become. You notice how humour survives in fragments. A dry remark about empty streets, a wry observation about too much togetherness. These jokes circulate, quietly exchanged between people who trust one another. Humour now functions less as entertainment and more as pressure release. Outdoor diversions adapt too. People walk more slowly, noticing details they once ignored. A carving in a doorway, a pattern in the stones. Observation becomes a pastime. You linger longer than necessary, letting your eyes wander, as if sightseeing in your own neighbourhood. Children invent games that require almost nothing. Clapping sequences, guessing games, imaginary worlds built from scraps. Their creativity fills gaps adults cannot. You watch them play and feel a mix of admiration and unease, aware that imagination thrives best when necessity demands it. Some households keep track of days with small rituals, lighting a candle at a specific hour, sharing a particular song each evening. These habits are not about celebration, they are about marking time so it does not dissolve entirely into anxiety. You adopt one yourself without ceremony, surprised at how quickly it anchors you. You also notice what people avoid. Loud gatherings, public displays, anything that might be mistaken for carelessness. Entertainment must now justify itself as harmless, restrained, responsible. Excess feels dangerous, even immoral. Occasionally someone breaks these unspoken rules. A group laughs too loudly. Music spills into the street. The response is swift but subdued. A knock, a request, no shouting. The city corrects itself, gently conserving energy. At night, you find yourself replaying moments of enjoyment with unusual intensity, a shared smile, a song that lingered longer than expected. These memories glow briefly before fading. You realise how much pleasure now depends on contrast on its rarity. There are whispers of illegal gatherings, small plays performed behind closed doors, dances held in back rooms. You never see them yourself, but the idea circulates, half tempting, half frightening. Risk and pleasure intertwine in uncomfortable ways. You reflect on how entertainment reveals values. What people choose to keep says something about what they need most. Not spectacle, not novelty, connection, familiarity, reassurance that life still holds space for enjoyment even when it must be carefully contained. As the evening wears on, you settle into quiet activity, reading, listening, sitting with your thoughts. The absence of structured entertainment leaves room for reflection, sometimes more than you want. You learn to pace yourself to balance distraction with rest. Outside the city hums softly, not silent but subdued. A voice carries briefly, then fades. A door closes. Somewhere someone laughs and is not ashamed of it. The sound reaches you like a small gift. You lie down thinking about how joy adapts under pressure. It does not disappear, it compresses, becoming denser, more meaningful. A single pleasant moment can carry the weight of many ordinary ones lost. Sleep approaches gently tonight. Your mind is calmer than it has been, lulled by the memory of shared stories and quiet music. You drift knowing that tomorrow will bring more constraints, more adjustments, but it will also bring more opportunities for these small resilient pleasures. The city may have closed its stages and silenced its crowds, but entertainment has not left. It has simply gone underground, woven into daily life, in ways that feel personal and fragile. You carry that knowledge with you as you rest comforted by the understanding that even in narrow circumstances, people find ways to be human one quiet evening at a time. Rules become more visible now, not because there are suddenly more of them, but because they are enforced more often. You feel their presence in the way people hesitate before acting, pausing to consider whether a choice might attract attention. Law in London has always existed, but now it presses closer to daily life, shaping small decisions as much as large ones. You see proclamations posted at intersections, edges curling from damp air. People gather to read them, careful not to crowd too tightly. The language is firm, sometimes stern, but rarely cruel. Stay indoors if ill. Avoid unnecessary gatherings. Report sickness promptly. These instructions are not new ideas, but seeing them written gives them weight. Enforcement varies by neighbourhood. In some areas, watchmen move through with quiet confidence, reminding people, gently correcting behaviour before it becomes a problem. In others, authority arrives abruptly, driven by complaint or rumour. You learn quickly that compliance depends as much on relationships as on rules. A familiar face enforcing a boundary feels different from a stranger doing the same. You notice how hunger complicates obedience. Someone must fetch food. Someone must work. Rules that make sense on paper strain when survival depends on bending them. You watch people negotiate exceptions in real time, explaining, pleading, promising restraint. Sometimes it works, sometimes it does not. There are moments of open defiance. A shopkeeper refuses to close. A group lingers too long at a doorway. These moments draw attention quickly. Voices rise then soften. Authority responds with presence rather than force whenever possible. Violence is avoided not out of mercy, but because it would shatter the fragile order everyone relies on. You hear complaints whispered at night. The rules favour those with resources. The rules punish the visible poor. The rules change without warning. None of these complaints are entirely wrong, yet most people continue to comply, not out of trust, but out of exhaustion. Resistance requires energy few can spare. One subtle shift stands out. People begin policing themselves. A neighbour reminds another to step back. A friend suggests ending a visit early. These corrections are awkward but effective. Responsibility spreads outward, reducing the need for official intervention. The city learns to regulate itself in small ways. You feel this internalization yourself. You count how long you have been outside. You choose less crowded routes. You reconsider errands that once felt necessary. Obedience becomes a habit woven into routine until it feels almost natural. At the same time, compassion tempers enforcement. You see officials look the other way when someone clearly has no alternative. A basket left where it technically should not be. A visit allowed to continue a few minutes longer. These small allowances keep resentment from boiling over. You notice how language changes around authority. Orders are framed as collective protection rather than command. The phrase "for the good of all" appears often. Whether or not people believe it, the idea offers a shared justification. Obedience feels less like submission and more like participation. Children absorb these cues quickly. They learn what not to do without being told explicitly. They sense when play should end, when voices should lower. Rules become part of the atmosphere, understood rather than explained. You hear stories of harsher enforcement elsewhere in the city, of fines, of brief imprisonments, of families separated. These accounts circulate with a mixture of fear and disbelief. They remind people that leniency is not guaranteed. At night, you reflect on how order survives under strain, not through perfection but through flexibility. Rules bend just enough to remain intact. Too rigid and they would snap. Too loose and chaos would creep in. The balance is delicate and constantly renegotiated. You lie awake, listening to footsteps outside, measuring their pace. Are they patrols? Neighbours? Someone heading home late? Each sound invites interpretation. Authority has taught you to listen differently, to notice patterns you once ignored. Morning arrives with familiar routines intact. Markets open cautiously. Work resumes. The rules have not stopped life. They have reshaped it, narrowing options while preserving structure. You move through the day aware of boundaries, both visible and imagined. You realise that obedience here is not blind. It is conditional, practical, negotiated moment by moment. People comply because the alternative feels worse. Disorder would invite suffering faster than rules ever could. As evening falls, you see a proclamation being replaced with a newer one. The old paper is peeled away and discarded. Change happens quietly without ceremony. The city adjusts again. You settle in for the night with a sense of weary acceptance. Law and order have not solved the crisis. They have simply kept the ground from shifting too violently beneath everyone's feet. That stability, however imperfect, allows people to rest, to plan, to endure. You close your eyes, knowing that tomorrow the rules will still be there, shaping choices large and small. You will follow most of them, bend a few, question some quietly. Like everyone else, you will keep moving within the lines, trusting that this shared discipline, fragile as it is, will carry the city through another day. You begin to notice that people are paying attention in a different way now. Not just to rules or rumours, but to patterns, small ones. Who falls ill and who does not? Which houses recover? Which streets seem spared a little longer? Observation becomes a quiet habit practiced without announcement. You hear neighbours trading these impressions carefully, almost apologetically. It seems to strike women harder on this street. The elderly linger longer in that house. Someone mentions that those who fell sick after exhaustion fared worse. No one presents these thoughts as certainty. They are offered gently, like fragile objects that might break if handled too roughly. You find yourself doing the same. You replay recent weeks in your mind, searching for connections. Who was coughing before the heat worsened? Who stopped eating properly? Who spent long hours outside? The act of noticing feels purposeful even if conclusions remain unclear. Attention itself becomes a form of participation. Some people begin keeping informal notes. Not ledgers, just marks in the margins of daily life. A line scratched into wood. A comment written beside a date. You glimpse such marks in a neighbour's doorway and realise they are tracking something. Not deaths exactly, but changes. Improvement, decline, stability. Doctors who remain speak more cautiously now. Their advice sounds less confident, more conditional. They ask questions before offering suggestions. How long has the fever lasted? Has appetite returned? Are there moments of clarity? You sense that experience is reshaping their approach, replacing certainty with attentiveness. You notice that certain practices fade quietly. Remedies, once popular, slip out of use when they fail too often. Others persist not because they cure, but because they seem to do no harm. People keep what feels neutral or comforting and discard what frightens without benefit. Trial and error unfolds across the city, unsystematic but persistent. One small adjustment becomes widespread without anyone claiming ownership of it. People who feel unwell rest sooner. They stop pushing through fatigue. You see fewer individuals boasting about working despite illness. Weakness is no longer admired. Preservation takes its place. The shift feels subtle but meaningful. Children too are watched more closely. Adults notice when they grow quiet or withdrawn. Play is interrupted more readily now, not out of panic, but precaution. A child is sent inside early. A game is ended gently. These decisions are made with uneasy intuition rather than rule. You realise that fear has matured into something more focused. Early panic scattered attention everywhere. Now it narrows. People choose what to monitor and what to ignore. This selectivity brings a fragile sense of control. You cannot stop the plague, but you can notice your body, your household, your immediate surroundings. You hear disagreements about what these observations mean. One person swears that fresh air makes all the difference. Another insists that rest matters more. Someone else points out cases that contradict both ideas. These conversations circle without resolution, but they sharpen awareness. Everyone listens more closely than before. You begin to trust certain signs. A returning appetite feels significant. Sleep that lasts longer than a few hours feels promising. These small victories are celebrated quietly, almost privately, as if announcing them might invite reversal. At the same time, disappointment is handled more carefully. When someone worsens, explanations are restrained. People avoid saying why. Blame feels pointless now. The focus shifts toward response rather than cause. What can be done now? Who can help? How to make the night easier? You notice how language changes around illness. Words soften. Instead of declaring outcomes, people describe states. He is resting. She is quieter today. This vagueness protects both speaker and listener from premature grief. Those who recover draw attention without seeking it. Their presence reassures others. You see them walking slowly thinner than before, moving with deliberate care. People watch discreetly, absorbing the sight. Recovery becomes a lesson showing that survival is possible, even if unpredictable. You also see how memory reshapes itself. Early weeks blur together while recent days stand out sharply. You mark time by improvement rather than decline now. This reorientation helps you keep going. At night, you reflect on how understanding grows in fragments, not through grand insight but through accumulation. 100 small observations layered over weeks, none decisive alone. Together they begin to outline something like knowledge. You lie awake listening to breathing in the room, measuring its steadiness. You do this without anxiety now, more like a habit of care. Monitoring becomes gentler when it is familiar. Outside the city continues its slow adjustment. People move with slightly more confidence, not because danger has passed, but because uncertainty has become navigable. You sense a collective learning underway, informal and imperfect, but real. Morning brings small tests of these lessons. You eat a little more carefully. You rest when tired. You open windows when the air feels right. None of these choices feels dramatic. They simply feel reasonable. You realise that survival often depends on attention more than answers, on noticing early, on responding kindly, on accepting that not everything can be explained in time to matter. As the day ends, you feel a quiet respect for this shared process, a city teaching itself how to endure by watching, adjusting and learning without instruction. No proclamations, no triumph, just persistence refined by experience. You prepare for sleep with the sense that something has shifted. Fear is still present, but it no longer dominates every thought. In its place is attentiveness, steady and calm. You breathe more evenly. You trust your senses a little more. Tomorrow will bring new contradictions, new surprises. Some observations will prove useless. Others may save lives without anyone ever knowing. For now, that uncertainty feels manageable. You close your eyes, aware that understanding does not arrive all at once. It grows quietly, the way dawn light fills a room, gradually enough that you only notice once it is already there. And with that gentle awareness, you let sleep take you, carried by the knowledge that paying attention imperfectly and patiently is sometimes the most human response available. You begin to feel it before you can name it. A tightening when someone unfamiliar comes too close. A calculation that runs quietly in the background whenever a new face enters your field of vision. Strangers have not changed, not really, but what they represent has. Unknown people now carry unknown risks, and that uncertainty reshapes every encounter. You notice it in the way people move past one another. Eye contact shortens. Bodies angle away instinctively. Greetings become nods rather than words. The city has learned a new choreography, one that favours distance without announcing it. You follow the steps, automatically adjusting your pace to avoid overlap. At doorways, conversations pause when someone unfamiliar approaches. Words resume only after the person has passed. This is not rudeness. It is caution practiced quietly. You sense how quickly trust has narrowed to a small circle defined by familiarity rather than kindness. You feel this shift most strongly when you meet someone new, perhaps a traveller delayed by circumstance, perhaps a worker sent from another parish. Their presence draws attention immediately. Questions arise that would once have felt intrusive. Where are you staying? Who do you know here? How long have you been in the city? The answers are weighed carefully, not just for content, but for tone. You experience this suspicion yourself. You find your gaze lingering longer than intended on unfamiliar faces. You note their condition, their breathing, their steadiness. You dislike this habit, yet you cannot stop it. Vigilance has become reflex. Markets reflect this change sharply. Vendors watch customers approach, judging not just their money, but their risk. Transactions become brisk. Conversation shrinks to essentials. You see people hesitate before handling goods touched by strangers, then proceed anyway, caught between need and caution. In narrower streets, you choose your path deliberately. If someone unfamiliar blocks the way, you wait rather than squeeze past. The pause feels awkward but safer. Others do the same. The city slows in small increments, each decision adding a fraction of hesitation to the whole. You hear stories of neighbourhoods turning away outsiders entirely, not violently, but firmly. A door left unopened, a question unanswered. This exclusion is rarely discussed openly, yet it spreads through imitation. People learn from what they observe others doing. There are moments when this caution becomes cruelty. A stranger asks for help and is ignored. Someone is accused without evidence. You witness these moments with discomfort, aware of how fear can strip empathy from ordinary interactions. You also understand the impulse behind them, which makes the discomfort sharper. Children sense the change too. They are warned not to speak to people they do not recognise. Play becomes insular. Groups shrink. A child watches a newcomer pass with open curiosity, then looks to an adult for guidance. The adult's response teaches caution without explanation. You notice how reputation becomes a form of protection. Known figures move more freely. A familiar baker, a regular porter. People greet them with relief, as if continuity itself offers safety. Being recognised matters more than being kind. At the same time, familiarity can be deceptive. You hear of trusted figures falling ill, of neighbours becoming sources of risk. These contradictions unsettle the rules people are trying to follow. If the familiar can be dangerous too, then what guidance remains? The city does not answer this question. It lets people wrestle with it individually. You begin to rely on small signals: cleanliness, calmness, familiarity with local habits. None of these guarantees safety, but they feel actionable. You realise how much humans crave criteria, even imperfect ones, when certainty disappears. Travellers suffer the most under this new suspicion. You see them lingering at the edges of activity, unsure where they are welcome. Some wear signs explaining their situation. Others carry letters of introduction like shields. These efforts help sometimes. Other times nothing does. You overhear arguments about whether this wariness protects or harms. Some claim it slows spread. Others point out that isolation creates desperation. The conversations end without agreement, leaving behaviour unchanged. People do what feels safest in the moment. You notice how loneliness deepens alongside caution. When strangers become threats, opportunities for connection shrink. New friendships do not form. Existing ones are guarded carefully. The city feels older, somehow less curious, more inward. At night, you replay interactions in your mind, wondering whether you were too distant or not distant enough. Did you stand too close? Did you refuse help too quickly? These questions linger unresolved. There are moments of quiet defiance against this suspicion. Someone offers assistance anyway. A door opens despite hesitation. These acts feel significant now, weighted with risk and intention. You remember them more clearly than moments of fear. You also recognise the toll this mindset takes on you. Constant evaluation exhausts the spirit. You miss the ease of unconsidered encounters. You miss the assumption that most people mean no harm. That assumption feels like a luxury of another time. As days pass, suspicion becomes normalised. You adjust without noticing. You choose routes that avoid unfamiliar areas. You greet known faces with warmth that surprises you. Trust concentrates rather than disappears. One evening, You help a stranger despite yourself. The act feels deliberate, almost ceremonial. You exchange few words. You part quickly. Yet the interaction stays with you, a reminder that caution has not erased compassion entirely. You lie down thinking about how danger reshapes social fabric. It does not tear it completely, it tightens it, pulling threads inward until only the strongest connections remain. This keeps people safe in some ways and isolated in others. Outside, footsteps pass that you do not recognize. You listen until they fade. Relief follows, then a faint sadness at that relief. You understand now that strangers have become mirrors for fear, reflecting uncertainty rather than intent. Sleep comes slowly, your mind still scanning imagined encounters. Eventually, fatigue quiets vigilance. You rest knowing that tomorrow you will meet familiar faces and unfamiliar ones again, navigating the narrow space between caution and humanity, learning daily how to live among others when every unknown carries weight. Kindness does not announce itself anymore. It moves quietly, almost shyly, slipping through the city in ways easy to miss if you are not watching for it. You notice it first in small adjustments. A loaf left on a step with no name attached. A bucket of water filled for someone else before you reach the well. A door held open just long enough to spare an awkward closeness. These gestures do not draw crowds. They are not spoken of afterward. They are designed to leave no trace because attention now carries risk. You learn to recognize them by their modesty, help that does not linger, care that avoids spectacle. You see a woman pause outside a sealed house, setting down a parcel without knocking. She steps back immediately, waiting only long enough to ensure it is noticed. No words are exchanged. The door opens a crack after she is gone. The exchange feels complete without acknowledgement. In narrow streets, people begin sweeping not just their own doorways, but a little beyond them. The clean stone offers reassurance to passers-by. You realize this is not vanity, it is communication. This space is tended. Someone is still paying attention here. Food circulates in unexpected ways. A pot simmers longer than necessary, so an extra portion can be shared. A basket is passed through several hands, each person taking only what they need. You watch this happen without instruction, coordinated by glances and timing rather than plans. You notice how often kindness avoids eye contact. People help while looking away, preserving dignity for both sides. Gratitude is expressed indirectly. A nod later, a returned favour weeks afterward. The accounting is loose forgiving. There are risks to generosity. You know this. Anyone who lingers too long near another household draws scrutiny. Anyone who helps openly may be judged careless. Yet the help continues, shaped to fit the moment. Assistance is offered quickly, withdrawn quickly, like a breath taken and released. Children become messengers of kindness without realizing it. A child carries bread to a neighbour because it feels natural, because adults hesitate. You see an older woman accept the bread with a smile that steadies her hands. The child runs off, unconcerned with meaning, while the meaning remains behind. You also see kindness directed toward those enforcing rules. A cup of water for a watcher. A stool offered to someone standing too long. These gestures soften boundaries without erasing them. Authority remains, but it is no longer faceless. At times, kindness takes the form of silence. Someone chooses not to repeat a damaging rumour. Someone stops a conversation before it turns cruel. Restraint becomes a gift, protecting others from unnecessary fear. You begin to appreciate how powerful silence can be when words would only wound. Care extends to the sick in careful ways. Fresh linen left near a door. A message passed through a watcher rather than directly. The help is practical, not sentimental. Comfort is offered without promises. You hear of people who take on extra burdens quietly, watching a neighbour's children for an afternoon, fetching supplies for someone who cannot leave. These acts are rarely discussed. Boasting would defeat the purpose. The city depends on them nonetheless. You notice how kindness restores a sense of normal time. Meals shared at usual hours, tasks completed on schedule. These rhythms reassure those receiving help that life has not completely lost its structure. Routine becomes a form of care. There are moments when generosity surprises you. A person you avoided offers assistance anyway. Someone known for severity acts gently. These contradictions challenge the simplified categories fear has built. You revise your judgments reluctantly, reminded that people contain more than their most cautious moments. You also recognize limits. Not everyone can help. Some barely manage themselves. The absence of generosity does not always signal cruelty. Often it signals exhaustion. You learn not to judge too quickly, reserving energy for compassion where it can be given. As days pass, you begin to anticipate these quiet exchanges. You leave something out, knowing it will be used. You accept help without asking questions. Trust forms in fragments pieced together through repeated small actions. You reflect on how kindness functions differently now. It is not expansive. It does not seek to transform the city. It aims to stabilize it, to keep individuals afloat long enough to reach the next day. This modest ambition feels appropriate. At night you replay moments of care more vividly than moments of fear. The memory of a shared meal, the relief of unexpected help. These images warm the mind, counterbalancing darker thoughts. You realize that kindness lingers longer than anxiety when recalled. You notice how this undercurrent of generosity prevents the city from turning entirely inward. Even as suspicion tightens circles, these acts create thin bridges between them. Not enough to erase distance, but enough to prevent isolation from becoming absolute. You also see kindness directed toward yourself. A stranger steps aside to give you space. Someone waits patiently rather than pressing past. These gestures feel almost intimate, now acknowledgements of shared vulnerability. As evening settles, you participate in one small act yourself. You do not think of it as bravery. It feels more like maintenance, something necessary to keep your own balance. You help because not helping would make the city feel colder than it already does. You lie down aware that kindness here does not cure illness or end fear. It does something quieter. It preserves the possibility of connection when everything else encourages withdrawal. It keeps people human in a situation that constantly threatens to reduce them to risks and rules. Outside, a door opens briefly, then closes. Somewhere nearby, someone eats a meal they did not have to worry about acquiring. The effect of your small contribution ripples outward in ways you will never see. Sleep comes more easily tonight. Your mind rests on the knowledge that beneath the city's tension, there is a steady exchange of care continuing without applause. You drift, knowing that even in the narrowest circumstances, people find ways to help one another quietly, and that this invisible network of kindness holds the city together as surely as any law or system ever could. You notice the change before anyone says it out loud. It is not dramatic. No bells announce it. No proclamation appears. The city simply feels lighter in a way that is hard to explain but easy to sense. Streets that once felt tense now carry a cautious looseness, as if London has unclenched its jaw slightly. You see it in the numbers posted each week, though you no longer rush to read them. They still matter, but they no longer dominate every conversation. The lists do not shrink suddenly, they soften. The rise slows. The fear attached to them eases just enough for people to breathe more deeply. Shops begin staying open a little longer, not boldly, not all at once, but tentatively, as if testing the air. A stall that closed at midday now lasts until late afternoon. A baker produces one extra batch. These are not declarations of victory. They are questions posed quietly to the future. You walk streets that once felt abandoned and notice movement returning in fragments. A door opens that has remained shut for weeks. A familiar face reappears, thinner, quieter, but alive. Recognition passes between you without words. Survival feels like a shared secret. The city's soundscape changes first. Footsteps grow more frequent. Voices linger slightly longer in conversation. You hear a laugh that does not immediately stop itself. These sounds do not erase what came before, but they layer over it, building something new without removing the old. You notice how people move differently now. They still keep distance, still scan unconsciously, but their posture has changed. Shoulders are less hunched. Movements are less abrupt. Fear has not gone, but it no longer commands every step. Some houses lose their watchers. The stools remain empty. The doors stay closed a while longer, then open carefully. People emerge blinking into the street, unsure how to resume ordinary life. You watch neighbours greet them without touching, without celebration, simply acknowledging their return. You hear that certain parishes report fewer deaths this week than last. The information spreads carefully, almost reverently. People do not repeat it loudly. They hold it close, as if too much enthusiasm might reverse the trend. Hope feels fragile now, something handled with both hands. Markets feel fuller, though still restrained. Goods appear more regularly. Prices steady slightly. You notice fewer arguments over small things. Energy returns in increments so small you only recognise them in retrospect. Children sense the change immediately. Their play grows louder without anyone permitting it. Games expand back into streets in cautious bursts. Adults watch closely, ready to intervene yet reluctant to interrupt. Joy is allowed to stretch, but not too far. You also see the cost of survival more clearly now. Those who return do so altered. Movements are slower, faces carry new lines. Conversations reference events without naming them directly. Everyone has lost something, even if they are still standing. The city does not rush to explain why this shift is happening. Some credit weather, others speak of exhaustion in the disease itself. Many avoid explanations entirely. What matters more is the shared recognition that something has changed, however slightly. You feel it in yourself. You sleep more deeply. Your appetite steadies. You catch yourself thinking beyond the next day again. These changes surprise you. You did not realise how narrow your focus had become until it began to widen. At the same time, caution remains woven into behaviour. People remember too well how quickly conditions worsened before. Nobody declares safety. Nobody speaks of endings. Instead, the city practices careful optimism moving forward without turning its back. You walk past burial grounds and notice no fresh earth today. The absence stands out more than the presence ever did. You pause, then continue, unsure how to feel. Relief and grief coexist easily now, no longer competing. In the evenings, gatherings grow slightly larger. Not crowds, just clusters. A few neighbours linger together. A story is shared without whispering. A song is hummed rather than merely remembered. These moments feel tentative but real. You also notice people taking stock, repairing things neglected for weeks, cleaning spaces that have been left untouched. These acts signal an orientation toward the future, however uncertain. Maintenance becomes a declaration that life will continue here. You reflect on how thinning feels different from ending. The plague has not left. It has loosened its grip. The city remains alert but no longer frozen. Movement resumes, carefully guided by memory as much as hope. At night, the streets are no longer quite so empty. Lamps glow more consistently. Footsteps pass at later hours. You listen and feel a cautious comfort in the sound of ordinary life resuming its rhythm. You lie down aware that this moment is transitional. It does not promise resolution. It offers possibility. The city is learning how to live again without forgetting how close it came to collapse. Sleep arrives more easily tonight. Your mind does not race as hard. Thoughts drift beyond immediate fear, touching plans, repairs, reunions. You do not cling to these thoughts. You let them pass gently, content to know they are possible again. Outside London breathes in and out with a steadier rhythm. It has not healed, but it has stabilised. That alone feels like progress. You close your eyes, knowing that tomorrow will bring more adjustments, more cautious steps forward. For now the city thins its fear just enough to rest, and you rest with it held inside this quiet, fragile easing that signals the beginning of something new, even if no one dares to name it yet. The returns do not happen all at once. They arrive unevenly, like a tide that forgets its own schedule. One morning you notice a carriage on a street that has not seen one in months. Another day a shutter lifts halfway and pauses, as if reconsidering before opening fully. Absence reverses itself, cautiously testing the ground it left behind. People come back changed. You recognise faces, but hesitate before greeting them. Weight has been lost. Expressions have sharpened or dulled. Voices sound different, steadier or more brittle. They carry the quiet authority of those who have waited out danger elsewhere, and now must re-enter a place that remembers everything. You hear the sound of trunks being dragged across floors. Furniture is rearranged. Houses breathe again as windows are thrown open wide. The smell of long closed rooms escapes into the street, stale but familiar. It feels like the city exhaling memories it held too tightly. Those who stayed watch the returns carefully, not with anger exactly, but with measurement. Who left early? Who sent help back? Who vanished without word? These details matter now, though few say so aloud. Reputation adjusts silently, recalibrated by absence and presence. You notice that greetings are restrained. There are no embraces. Words substitute for touch. You are well. You made it back. We are still here. These phrases carry more weight than they ever did before. Conversations feel deliberate, as if everyone is choosing language with care. Commerce responds quickly. Shops that catered to wealth reopen their doors, dusting shelves, rehanging signs. Services resume that had gone quiet. Tailors, tutors, clerks. The city's upper layers begin to rebuild themselves atop what endured below. There is an awkwardness in these first encounters. Those who fled carry stories of safety and countryside air. Those who stayed carry stories of endurance and loss. The two narratives do not align easily. You sense people editing themselves, avoiding comparisons that might harden into resentment. Some houses remain empty despite the general return. Owners did not survive, or they chose not to come back, or there is no one left to claim them. These gaps punctuate the city reminders that return is never complete. You pass such houses and feel a momentary pause in your steps, as if the absence still has gravity. Children react with curiosity rather than judgment. They ask questions adults avoid. Where did you go? Was it better? Why did you come back? Adults answer carefully, smoothing edges. Children accept the answers and move on, already adapting to the new configuration of familiar faces. You notice how labour shifts again. Servants return to households that feel changed. Power dynamics reassert themselves, but not exactly as before. Those who stayed have gained quiet confidence. They know how the city behaves under strain. That knowledge lingers in posture and tone. There is also relief. Not joy, not celebration, but relief. The kind that loosens muscles you did not realise were clenched. Seeing people return suggests continuity, a thread reconnecting past and present. You feel it yourself, a subtle reassurance that the city has not fractured beyond repair. Yet caution remains embedded. Returned families keep to themselves at first. They watch numbers, they listen. They do not rush into old habits. Memory tempers enthusiasm. No one wants to be the one who declares normal too early. You see efforts at reconciliation small and tentative. A shared meal offered, an account settled late, but honestly, an apology given without explanation. These gestures do not erase tension, but they ease it. The city prefers repair to confrontation. At the same time, there are moments of quiet distance. A door not reopened to someone who left. An invitation withheld. These decisions are not announced. They simply exist. Social boundaries redraw themselves with invisible ink. You reflect on how return differs from survival. Surviving is about staying alive. Returning is about resuming connection. It requires a vulnerability of a different kind. You watch people navigate this, carefully aware that coming back means facing what they avoided. Evenings grow busier, more lights, more movement. The city regains layers of sound it had shed. Horses, laughter, arguments. The noise feels welcome, though you remain alert within it. You find yourself adjusting again, recalibrating expectations. The streets feel fuller but not crowded, familiar but altered. You walk among people who carry parallel experiences that may never fully intersect. As night falls, you pass a house where voices gather inside a mix of those who stayed and those who left. The sound drifts outward, tentative but real. It feels like a bridge forming, fragile but usable. You lie down thinking about how cities heal, not by erasing absence, but by incorporating it. The returns do not undo what happened. They add new layers, new tensions, new possibilities. Sleep comes with a sense of cautious continuity. Tomorrow, more people may come back, or not. Either way, the city will adjust again. You are learning that London survives not by restoring itself perfectly, but by allowing itself to change and still function. Outside wheels roll past more frequently now. Footsteps overlap. The city sounds fuller, heavier, alive in a different way. You close your eyes knowing that return is not an ending. It is another phase of endurance, and you drift off, carried by the steady, uneven rhythm of a city, learning how to hold both memory and movement at the same time. Return does not happen all at once. It arrives unevenly, like footsteps heard before the person appears. You notice unfamiliar coats on familiar streets, luggage carried carefully rather than proudly. People come back quietly, as if unsure whether they are welcome to claim space again. The city watches without comment, observing how these reappearances fit into what has changed. You see a carriage stop at the end of a street that has grown used to its absence. The horses look thin. The driver looks wary. A family steps down, scanning faces for recognition. Some neighbours nod. Others look away. The greeting is cautious, shaped by memory of who stayed and who left. Homes that were shut for months are opened again. Shutters creak. Dust is swept out. The air inside these houses smells stale, as if time itself lingered there. You pass one doorway and glimpse furniture draped in cloth, untouched. The sight feels intimate, like stumbling into someone else's pause. Those returning bring stories, though they share them selectively. Tales of quiet countryside, of isolation that felt safe at first, then hollow, of watching the city from a distance through letters and rumour. You listen without interrupting, aware that these stories carry guilt as well as relief. Not everyone returns. You begin to realise this gradually. A house remains closed longer than expected. A name is mentioned that no one answers. Absence takes on a different meaning now. It no longer signals flight. It signals loss. The city marks these gaps, silently folding them into daily routes. Work resumes in altered forms. Trades reconnect. Apprentices return to masters who look older than memory allows. Shops reopen with reduced stock and cautious hours. You feel the economy knitting itself back together with uneven stitches, fragile but determined. Children greet returning adults with curiosity rather than excitement. They have grown used to life without them. Recognition takes time. You see reunions that feel awkward, love searching for familiar shapes in changed faces. Adaptation runs both ways. Some who stayed feel resentment stirring when the returnees speak too lightly of hardship. Others feel relief that responsibility can finally be shared again. These reactions exist side by side, rarely spoken aloud. Politeness smooths over tension, at least on the surface. You notice how behaviour reflects unspoken negotiation. Those who left often defer slightly, allowing others to lead. Those who stayed claim space with quiet confidence. No rules govern this. It emerges naturally, shaped by shared understanding. Markets grow livelier as returning households bring demand with them. New goods appear. Old routines re-emerge. Yet caution persists. People still glance around before lingering. Memory remains close enough to guide behaviour. You also see acts of reconciliation, small and unannounced. A returned family delivers bread to neighbours who helped maintain their home. A servant thanks someone who checked on them while their employers were away. These gestures help smooth rough edges left by absence. There are moments when bitterness surfaces despite restraint. A comment lands wrong. A silence stretches too long. These moments pass without confrontation. People are tired of conflict. Survival has made compromise feel necessary. You feel your own perspective shifting. The city feels fuller now, but not crowded. Movement returns without urgency. The balance between caution and confidence remains delicate. You adjust alongside everyone else, recalibrating expectations. At night, lights appear in windows that have been dark for months. The effect is subtle but powerful. The city looks inhabited again in a way that feels intentional rather than desperate. You walk slower, letting the sight settle. You also sense that return brings responsibility. Those who come back must learn the city as it is now, not as they left it. New habits, new boundaries, new unspoken rules. Adaptation does not end with survival. It continues into recovery. You hear laughter that feels less forced. Conversation stretches without snapping. Plans are made cautiously prefaced with conditions. If things continue this way, if nothing changes. Hope is phrased, carefully protected by realism. You reflect on how return reshapes memory. Stories of the worst days are retold differently now, softened by distance and outcome. Some details fade, others sharpen. The city begins the slow work of deciding what to remember and what to let rest. As evening settles, you sit with the sense that London is not returning to what it was. It is becoming something else, shaped by who remained, who left, and who came back, altered by both choices. You prepare for sleep, aware that recovery is not an event. It is a process marked by small adjustments and quiet negotiations. Tonight, the city feels fuller, steadier, and more complicated than before. You close your eyes, listening to the renewed sounds of life around you. Footsteps that feel familiar again. Voices that linger. Doors that open without fear. You rest knowing that return is underway, not as a celebration, but as a careful re-inhabiting of space, memory and trust. Memory begins its work quietly. You notice it in conversation first, in the way people refer to events without naming them directly. That week, those days, before things turned. Language softens the edges, creating distance between the present and what still feels too close. The city is already editing its own past. You hear people comparing experiences, not to argue, but to understand where they fit inside the larger story. Someone says it was worse in the northern parishes. Another insists the river wards suffered more. These comparisons are not about accuracy so much as positioning. Everyone wants to know whether their fear was justified, whether their endurance was ordinary or exceptional. You find yourself revisiting your own memories with new eyes. Moments that felt overwhelming now appear manageable in retrospect. Other moments barely noticed at the time suddenly stand out. A single knock, a night without sleep, a street gone quiet. Memory rearranges importance without asking permission. There is talk of lessons, though no one agrees on what they are. Some insist the city must change how it lives. Others argue that life will simply resume its old shape because it always does. You listen without choosing sides. Both views feel incomplete. You notice how moral judgments creep into these discussions. Who behaved well? Who failed? Who showed courage? Who showed selfishness? These labels are applied gently at first, then more firmly. Stories simplify as they circulate. Complexity fades. You feel uneasy about this flattening, aware of how much nuance is being lost. Children ask questions now that adults avoided earlier. Why were people locked inside? Why did animals disappear? Why did we not see certain people again? Adults answer with varying degrees of honesty. Some explain, some deflect, some admit they do not know. The act of asking itself feels significant. It signals a shift from survival to understanding. You also notice how memory is preserved physically. Marks on door frames remain faintly visible. Furniture bears scratches from rearranged rooms. These traces resist erasure. They linger as quiet reminders embedded in daily surroundings. You touch one absent-mindedly and feel a jolt of recognition. People begin telling stories meant for reassurance, tales of narrow escapes, of recoveries that seemed unlikely. These stories serve a purpose. They offer narrative shape to chaos. You recognise their value even as you sense how selective they are. At the same time, certain stories are avoided, losses too painful to recount, decisions that still feel questionable. These remain unspoken, held privately. Silence becomes part of collective memory as much as speech. You hear that some want public acknowledgements, days of prayer, markers, records compiled carefully. Others resist, fearing that remembrance might reopen wounds. The city does not decide quickly. It hesitates, balancing commemoration against fatigue. You feel this tension within yourself. Part of you wants to move forward without looking back. Another part feels that forgetting too quickly would cheapen what was endured. You carry both impulses without resolving them. As routines normalise, further memory risks being overtaken by habit. Shops open, work resumes, conversations shift toward ordinary concerns. You catch yourself going hours without thinking about the plague at all. The realisation startles you. Relief follows, then guilt. All three coexist easily. You notice how newcomers experience the city differently. Those who arrive after the worst days sense only fragments. They hear references they cannot fully decode. They walk streets unaware of what happened there. Their innocence feels both comforting and disorienting. Even among those who live through it, memories diverge. Two people recall the same week differently. One remembers terror, the other remembers boredom. Both are true. Experience depends on position, timing, and temperament. You begin to accept that there will never be a single story. As evening falls, you hear someone recount events with certainty that surprises you. Dates are named, causes asserted. You recognise the urge behind it. Certainty offers closure. You resist it quietly, preferring the messy truth of not knowing everything. You reflect on how societies remember crises, not as continuous experiences, but as selected moments stitched together. Over time, these stitches tighten, smoothing irregularities. You wonder which moments will survive this process and which will fade. At home, you find an object you used during the worst weeks. A cloth, a container. Something once essential, now ordinary again. You hold it briefly, then set it aside. Its meaning has changed. It no longer signals fear. It signals endurance. You prepare for sleep, aware that memory will continue to shift. What feels vivid now may soften. What feels insignificant may grow larger. This process is not deliberate. It unfolds naturally, shaped by repetition and distance. Outside the city settles into evening sounds that feel familiar again. Yet beneath them lies an undercurrent of shared experience, invisible but present. You are part of it, whether you speak of it or not. You close your eyes, knowing that memory does not ask permission before shaping the future. It works quietly, influencing choices, habits, and expectations. Tonight you let it rest alongside you, neither pushing it away nor clinging too tightly. Sleep comes gently. In your dreams, the city appears layered, past and present, overlapping without conflict. You wake knowing that London will continue to tell its story in fragments, arguments, silences and routines. You will carry your version with you, incomplete but honest. As life moves forward and memory slowly finds its place within it. Life does not snap back into place. It slides. You notice this in the smallest habits first. The way you pause before opening a door, even when there is no reason to hesitate. The way you listen for a moment before stepping into the street. These pauses linger long after the danger has thinned like echoes that refuse to fade completely. You wake now with a sense of forward motion rather than dread. Tasks line up in your mind again. Work to be done. Repairs delayed for weeks finally addressed. A cracked step mended. A loose shutter fixed. These actions feel meaningful, not just practical. They signal an intention to stay. The streets feel familiar but subtly altered. You recognise routes, yet they carry different weight. Corners where you once avoided now feel neutral. Houses that were silent are active again, though sometimes with new occupants. The city looks the same, but your body remembers it differently. People speak more freely about the future, though always with conditions attached. If things continue, if nothing worsens, plans are tentative, sketched lightly rather than carved in certainty. You sense how quickly confidence was learned and unlearned, and how carefully it is being rebuilt. You notice changes in how people care for themselves. Rest is taken more seriously. Illness is acknowledged earlier. Someone sits down without apology when tired. These behaviours feel new, yet they quickly become normal. The city has learnt something about limits, and it shows in posture and pace. Work resumes in fuller form, but not without adjustment. Hours are shorter for some. Tasks are shared more evenly. You see fewer people boasting about endurance. Pride has shifted away from pushing through pain and toward preserving strength. This change feels quiet but significant. You also notice how food is treated differently. Meals are simpler but more intentional. Waste is avoided. Leftovers are repurposed carefully. The memory of scarcity lingers just enough to guide behaviour without dominating it. Eating feels less automatic, more considered. Children return to play with enthusiasm that surprises you. Their energy spills into streets and yards, reshaping spaces that had grown too still. Adults watch, with a mixture of joy and alertness, stepping in only when necessary. The balance between freedom and caution is negotiated daily. You find yourself thinking beyond immediate survival again. Thoughts stretch toward weeks rather than hours. You consider improvements rather than contingencies. These mental shifts feel fragile at first, then steadier with repetition. Hope re-enters quietly without fanfare. Some habits fade on their own. Vinegar bowls disappear. Windows are closed more often. Night listening softens. Other habits persist. Hand washing remains frequent. Distance is maintained without thought. These remnants of crisis blend into routine, becoming part of the city's character. You notice how conversations change tone. Stories of hardship are still told, but they no longer dominate every exchange. Laughter returns in fuller measure. Arguments resume over ordinary matters. These signs of normal friction feel oddly comforting. Conflict about trivial things suggests that life has space again. There are moments when fear resurfaces unexpectedly, a sudden cough in a crowded space, a familiar sound that recalls earlier nights. The reaction is swift, then passes. You breathe through it. Others do the same. The city has learned how to calm itself. You see people investing again. Time, effort, emotion. A shopkeeper repaints a sign. A family plants something that will not be ready for months. These acts signal belief in continuity. They feel like quiet commitments to a future that is no longer hypothetical. Relationships shift subtly. Some bonds strengthen permanently, forged in shared endurance. Others loosen their necessity faded. You accept these changes without forcing explanations. Crisis clarified priorities, and not all connections return to their previous shape. You also notice how the city carries its experience forward without constant reference. There is no daily reminder of what happened. Instead, the memory hums beneath activity influencing choices without demanding attention. This integration feels healthier than obsession. At night, sleep comes more easily now. Dreams are less crowded with interruption. When you wake, it is often to ordinary thoughts rather than urgent checks. The body relearns rest, gradually trusting silence again. You walk one evening through streets that once felt threatening and feel a quiet satisfaction in your ease. Not relief exactly, but familiarity reclaimed. The city has not erased its past. It has absorbed it. You reflect on how adjustment works. Not by forgetting, but by accommodating. Life expands around memory rather than pushing it away. You carry what you learned forward not as fear, but as awareness. You notice how newcomers navigate the city now, unaware of the tension once layered over every interaction. You allow them that ignorance without resentment. Their ease feels like a sign of recovery rather than disrespect. As routines settle, you stop measuring progress constantly. You live, you plan, you adapt. The city no longer requires constant interpretation. It allows you to exist without commentary. You prepare for sleep with a sense of steadiness that feels earned, not triumphant, not naive, simply grounded. The city hums at a manageable volume, neither silent nor overwhelming. Outside footsteps pass with ordinary purpose. Doors open and close without drama. The night holds no special instructions. You welcome this simplicity. You close your eyes, knowing that life after crisis is not a return to before. It is a continuation shaped by experience. London moves forward, carrying its altered rhythms, and you move with it, no longer braced, no longer frozen. Sleep takes you gently. Your breathing slows. The city rests alongside you, not healed completely, but functioning, adjusting, living. Tomorrow will bring ordinary challenges again, and that ordinariness feels like a gift you do not take for granted. You drift knowing that survival has turned into living quietly and imperfectly, and that this transition, gradual and unspectacular, may be the most meaningful change of all. You walk the streets with a strange sense of recognition and distance at the same time. The buildings stand where they always have. The signs hang from the same iron brackets. The river smells the same on certain mornings. Yet your body reacts differently to all of it, as if the city you knew has been subtly replaced by a version that looks identical but carries a different weight. You notice this most when you move without thinking. Turning a corner used to feel automatic. Now there is a brief internal check. Not fear exactly, more like awareness that never quite switches off. You allow it, recognizing it as part of how you have changed alongside the city. People greet one another with familiarity again, but the greetings carry layers. A simple good morning can mean we are still here, we made it through, we are trying to live again. These meanings sit beneath ordinary words, unspoken but understood. You sense them even when nothing is said. Certain places pull at your attention unexpectedly. A doorway you pass daily without noticing now slows your steps. A street that once echoed with carts and voices reminds you of weeks when it did not. These locations feel marked even without visible signs. Memory has claimed them quietly. You realise that the city has not erased what happened. It has folded it inward. Conversations rarely linger on the worst days, yet references slip out in small ways. A phrase, a pause, a shared look. the past is present without demanding centre stage. You notice how routines have absorbed lessons. People rest more easily when tired. Errands are spaced rather than rushed. Crowds are navigated with subtle choreography, learned through experience rather than instruction. These habits feel natural now, no longer tied consciously to fear. Work carries a different tone. Productivity matters, again, but not at any cost. You see people stop earlier, share tasks, accept limits without embarrassment. The city has learned something about fragility, and it shows in how effort is measured. Food tastes slightly different, not because recipes have changed, but because attention has. Meals are eaten more deliberately. Conversation happens more often during them. You notice when someone eats well and when they do not, a sensitivity that did not exist before. Nourishment has become visible. Children run freely again, but adults watch in a way that is gentler and more alert than before. Play is louder now, spilling into streets with confidence. You smile at the sound, then listen until it fades, aware of how much silence once filled these spaces. You catch yourself thinking of the city as a shared body rather than a backdrop. When one part struggled, others felt it. When recovery began, it spread unevenly, but perceptibly. This awareness lingers, changing how you interpret everyday movement. There are moments when the past surfaces sharply. A bell rings for a reason unrelated to loss, and your breath catches anyway. Someone coughs nearby and your attention narrows for a second too long. These reactions pass, but they leave traces. You do not judge them. You accept them as residue. You also notice how easily life distracts you again. A problem at work, a disagreement with a neighbour, a plan that requires thought. These ordinary concerns reclaim space in your mind. You welcome them. They signal that your world has widened beyond survival. You walk through areas once hardest hit and see no visible difference now. Shops are open, windows are bright, people linger. If you did not know what happened, you might miss it entirely. This realization feels unsettling and comforting at once. The city heals without ceremony. You begin to understand that recovery is not about restoring a previous version of life. It is about continuing with awareness layered into routine. The city looks the same, but it does not feel the same. Neither do you. Some people speak openly about how they have changed. Others never mention it. Both responses feel valid. Transformation does not require narration. It exists whether acknowledged or not. You notice how quickly new residents adapt. Those who arrive now learn the city as it is without the burden of memory. Their ease feels almost miraculous. You allow it, recognizing that cities survive by absorbing newcomers who do not carry the same weight. At the same time, those who lived through the worst days share an unspoken bond. You recognize it in brief exchanges, a nod, a half smile, a pause that says more than words. This connection does not demand closeness, it simply exists. You reflect on how the city balances continuity and change. Buildings endure, people rotate, habits evolve, memory settles into corners rather than dominating the centre. This balance allows life to move forward without denying what shaped it. Evenings feel different now, not lighter exactly, but steadier. The city hums with ordinary activity. You sit and listen without scanning for danger. The absence of vigilance feels unfamiliar, then welcome. You think about how the plague has altered perception more than appearance. Streets remain streets. Homes remain homes. What changed is how meaning attaches to them. places now carry emotional histories alongside physical ones. You realise that this layering is permanent. Even as time passes, the experience will remain embedded in how the city responds to future uncertainty. The memory will surface again someday, shaping choices quietly. As you prepare for sleep, you notice how your body settles more fully than it once did. Breathing deepens. Muscles loosen. Rest feels deserved rather than borrowed. You take comfort in this physical signal of adaptation. Outside the city continues at a pace that feels right. Not hurried, not stalled, simply moving. You allow yourself to trust it again, knowing trust does not mean forgetting. You close your eyes with the sense that London now exists in two forms at once. The city has always been, and the city shaped by what it endured. Both are real, both are present. Sleep arrives gently. Your thoughts drift without urgency. Tomorrow will bring ordinary concerns and small surprises. You are ready for them. The city rests with you, carrying its altered weight quietly unchanged in shape, yet transformed in substance. You drift knowing that life has resumed, not by erasing what happened, but by carrying it forward in a way that allows breathing room again. You feel the ending before you understand it, not the end of memory, not the end of loss, but the end of holding your breath. Life no longer feels provisional. You wake without immediately checking yourself. You move through the day without constantly measuring risk. These shifts arrive quietly settling into your body before your thoughts catch up. London continues to function not triumphantly but steadily. The systems that strained under pressure now carry ordinary weight again. Markets run on familiar schedules. Streets fill and empty according to habit rather than fear. Bells ring for reasons that have nothing to do with death, and when they do, your heart no longer jumps every time. You notice how people speak of the plague now. It has become a past tense event, referenced carefully, often indirectly. That year, the sickness, when things were bad. Language places it behind you without sealing it away completely. The city remembers without dwelling. You pass places that once felt unbearable and feel only a faint echo. The intensity has softened. What remains is knowledge rather than fear. You know how quickly conditions can change. You know how fragile routines can be. This awareness does not paralyze you, it steadies you. There are visible signs of repair everywhere. Roofs mended, shops repainted, streets cleared of clutter left behind during crisis. These acts are practical, but they also feel symbolic. The city is tending to itself, restoring surfaces, while accepting that some marks will remain underneath. You also see people tending to one another differently now. Conversations allow pauses. Disagreements end sooner. Exhaustion is acknowledged rather than hidden. The city carries a gentler tone, not because everyone is kinder, but because everyone has learned what strain feels like. Some habits formed during the worst weeks never fully disappear. People wash hands more often. Windows are opened instinctively. Crowds are navigated with care. These behaviours no longer signal fear. They signal adaptation. The city has learned without needing to be reminded. You reflect on how survival reshaped priorities. Status mattered less when health was uncertain. Wealth mattered less when movement was restricted. Relationships mattered more. Proximity mattered more. Attention mattered more. These lessons do not vanish simply because danger recedes. You also notice how quickly new concerns fill the space left behind. Politics, trade, personal disputes, ordinary anxieties reclaim their territory. This is not disrespectful to the past. It is necessary. Life expands again, occupying all available room. You walk by the river one evening and watch the water move steadily past. It has seen everything and carries none of it. The sight calms you. You realize how much you need symbols of continuity, reminders that not everything reacts to human crisis. At home, you find objects that once felt essential now resting unused. You consider discarding them, then keep them anyway, not as talismans, but as reminders. They represent what you endured and what you learned. Their presence feels grounding. You notice how the city absorbs newcomers now without tension. People arrive who did not experience the worst days. They move easily. They ask simple questions. You answer without burdening them with detail. Their ease is part of recovery. London survives by welcoming those who do not carry its heaviest memories. Those who lived through the plague recognize one another still, but the recognition no longer demands acknowledgement. It has softened into something private, a shared past that does not need to be revisited constantly to remain real. You realize that what defines this period is not the plague itself, but what follows it. The decisions made afterward, the behaviours that persist, the quiet recalibration of values. This is where history truly settles, not in crisis but in response. As you prepare for sleep, you feel no need to stay alert. The night holds no special instructions. You trust the quiet again. This trust does not feel naive. It feels earned. The city outside breathes at a steady pace. Footsteps pass. Doors close. Conversations fade naturally rather than abruptly. Nothing demands your attention. You allow yourself to rest fully, body and mind, aligning with the rhythm around you. You understand now that living through the Great Plague did not make people fearless. It made them aware. That awareness shaped London long after the sickness faded, influencing how it met future uncertainty. You close your eyes, knowing that what remains is not trauma alone, but experience. Experience that teaches restraint. Experience that encourages care. Experience that allows the city to continue altered but intact. The story does not end with an announcement. It settles. It becomes part of the ground beneath your feet, supporting life rather than interrupting it. And with that understanding, you let go of the day, trusting the night to be simply night again. The city grows quieter now, not with the sharp silence of fear, but with the ordinary hush that comes when people sleep. London rests the way a tired body rests, not perfectly relaxed, but no longer braced. You allow your breathing to slow. There is nothing to listen for, no sound that requires interpretation. The night does not ask anything of you. It simply exists. Your thoughts soften. Images drift without urgency. Streets you walked earlier. Voices you heard. Light in windows. These details float gently, no longer connected to outcomes or consequences. You feel the bed beneath you, solid, reliable. The same surface it has always been. Your body recognizes this steadiness and responds, muscles loosening, weight settling fully. The past stays where it belongs, not forgotten, but no longer pressing forward. It becomes part of the larger shape of things, one chapter among many. The city will wake tomorrow and continue as it always has. So will you. But for now, nothing needs doing. Let the sounds outside fade into a low, even rhythm. Let your breathing follow it. Slow, easy, unforced. If thoughts arise, let them pass. There's no need to hold them. The day is complete. London sleeps. You sleep with it. Sweet dreams.